Chapter 19. Meg stared blankly for a moment, but he quickly realized that Amy must have felt that she hadn't been of much help because she hadn't been as successful as him at the cashier counter. Putting down the bowl in his hand, Meg looked at Amy's small eyes and couldn't help but feel a little distressed. It seemed that the little girl was still not confident. Actually, in his eyes, it was already very good for the 4-year-old Amy to be able to do so much. Who said so? How could our Amy be useless? It's mostly because of Amy that we were able to sell 4 plates of fried rice today. Secondly, when we were at the cashier counter, the 4 plates of fried rice cost 2,400 copper coins. Amy calculated correctly, but Grandpa Morby didn't have that many copper coins, so he could only use the more beautiful and valuable gold coins as a substitute. Meg looked into Amy's eyes and shook his head seriously. Really? Amy's eyes grew brighter and brighter as she listened to Meg's words, but she still wasn't confident. Of course it's true. Amy has never seen gold coins before. This is Father's fault, because Father didn't even earn a single gold coin before. If I have to say who's wrong, then it's that I didn't tell Amy that silver coins, gold coins, and dragon coins can be used to buy things just like copper coins. I should reflect on myself. I hope our little darling Amy can forgive me. Meg nodded with a self-blaming expression on his face. No, how can you blame Lord Father? Lord Father treats Xiao Mi the best. Amy shook her head vigorously and lowered her eyes. She said with a little grievance, Teacher Luna taught me before, but so many copper coins turned into so few gold coins. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. Besides, there were too many things to change, so Meg's eyebrows trembled, and he almost couldn't hold back his laughter. Amy's explanation was really too cute, but looking at the little girl's timid eyes, he felt a little sad. The external environment had a great influence on a person's character, especially for people like Amy who were slowly shaping their 3 views and forming habits. Her previous life had been too poor, and the humans and elves despised half-elves, which made her feel a little inferior and lacking in self-confidence. Fortunately, Amy was still young, and this kind of mentality was just a budding bud. Meg believed that he could slowly help her adjust and become a confident little girl. In the future, I can't let Amy be mocked and looked down upon by others. I have to treat her like the apple of my eye and raise her into a happy little princess, Meg told himself in his mind. However, when it came to arithmetic, the standard of mathematics in this world was indeed worrying. It was even worse than the standard of foreign people in his previous life. Even adding and subtracting numbers with more than 2 digits took a long time. In this world where culture was not widespread, this was not a strange thing. But Meg suddenly had some ideas about how to build Amy's confidence. China was naturally one of the countries with the highest standard of mathematics on Earth, and it was the 9-9 multiplication table that made a great contribution. Meg reached out to rub Amy's hair, put the small bowl in front of her, and said with a smile, Eat this bowl of fried rice first. After eating, Father will teach you a kind of arithmetic formula. After you learn it, you will be better than those students studying in Chaos School, and it will be easier for you to collect money in the future. Really? Better than those big brothers and sisters? Amy's eyes lit up immediately, and she looked at Meg in disbelief. In her eyes, those big brothers and sisters who sat in the classroom and studied with Teacher Luna every day were super awesome. Of course it's true. When has Father ever lied to you? Meg nodded. Amy nodded and said seriously, Father has never lied to Amy. Amy will learn seriously. Then she began to eat obediently. Meg looked at Amy, who was eating cutely, and picked up his spoon to eat as well. The 9-9 multiplication table was a divine weapon. If Amy mastered it, it would be easy for her to bully those children who were still counting with their fingers. The first step to boosting her confidence would start from here. After dinner, Mag cleaned up the dishes in the kitchen. He looked at the greasy plates in the sink, and didn't want to wash them. After a moment of hesitation, he asked the system in his mind, System, do you sell dishwashers? This system does not sell electrical appliances, the system replied. Just tell me, are you selling or not? I will pay. Meg pursed his lips. The system was silent for a moment, and then it gave a price in words, basic dishwasher. Can wash 5 plates and 10 spoons at a time. Price, 3 gold coins. This system is really greedy for money. It has no principles at all. Meg rolled his eyes. He had seen through the system's bottom line. However, the price was still acceptable. He said without hesitation, "So cheap? Then I want one. Deduct the money from my credit limit first. Payment successful. Dishwasher in place." Another row of words floated by. Mag looked at the bright silver dishwasher on the stove, and his eyes lit up. This thing looked very high-tech. He opened the lid, and placed all the plates and spoons in the sink into it. He pressed the on button, and the lid opened automatically in less than a minute. The plates inside had already become shiny and new. Modern technology was really convenient. Meg put the bowls and spoons away with satisfaction. Amy stood at the kitchen door and looked at Meg expectantly. "Father, what are we going to learn?" "The multiplication table." "Amy, wait for me. I will go get a pen and paper. Today, I will try to memorize a few lines." He went upstairs to get a piece of paper and a pen, and then sat down at the table to write down the multiplication table in the form of a ladder. "Thank you, boss," Mag said, and then went upstairs to get a piece of paper and a pen. The language of this world was naturally different from the language on Earth. However, the common language was similar to the Oracle bone script. The numbers were the same as the Arabic numerals. The development of history always had some surprising similarities. Meg had inherited the memory of his predecessor, so he had a complete grasp of this world's language. Father's handwriting is so beautiful. Amy was watching Meg write the multiplication table. She clapped her hands and praised him. She looked at Meg with admiration. She used to think that Teacher Luna's handwriting was the best, but her father's handwriting was even better than Teacher Luna's. It was as if they were carved. Meg was praised by Amy and looked at with admiration. When he was young, he was forced to practice writing for an hour every day. Suddenly, he felt that it was worth it. His good handwriting was finally appreciated by someone. He smiled and said, "Then when father has time, can he teach me how to write?" Chapter 20. Yes, because there are 9 rows and 9 columns, it's called the 9x9 multiplication table. Amy already has some foundation in addition and subtraction, so it shouldn't be too difficult for her to learn this. Meg looked at the neatly arranged, stair-shaped multiplication table. Both the horizontal and vertical lines were neat and the handwriting was clear. He put down the pen with satisfaction and smiled. "Then what's that little cross in the middle?" Amy asked, pointing at the X in confusion. "This is a multiplication sign. It has the same meaning as multiplication, so it's simpler to express it this way." Meg explained with a smile. He asked Amy to sit down on the chair next to him and pushed the multiplication table closer to her. "Only father knows this multiplication table. You only need to remember 81 items, and then learn the decimal system well. Then you can solve most of the math you need in your life." "Wow, father is so awesome. Last time, Teacher Luna told me that if I want to memorize the multiplication table, I need to memorize 1770 items, but I only memorized about 100. Amy looked at Meg with admiration. She didn't expect that not only was her father's handwriting beautiful, but he also knew simpler math than Teacher Luna. He was really amazing. Although he was standing on the shoulders of the ancient Chinese sages, and it wasn't good to show off, Meg felt really good to be admired by his daughter. He smiled and pointed to the first item on the upper left corner and said, "Then let's learn the first column today. The numbers on both sides of the multiplication sign are the multiplication signs, and the product is the result of the calculation." Meg explained the structure of the multiplication table to Amy in detail. Under Teacher Luna's teaching, Amy did have some foundation in mathematics. At least she understood the meaning of each number and had a certain concept of addition and subtraction. However, there was no decimal system in mathematics in this world, so he spent a lot of time slowly teaching Amy the meaning of the decimal system. What comforted Meg the most was that Amy didn't doubt anything he said. Even if it completely overturned what Teacher Luna had taught her, she still chose to listen to him unconditionally and quickly accepted the concept of decimal multiplication. 1 is 1, 1 is 2. Amy recited after Meg. The little girl's memory was pretty good. After reciting after Meg a dozen times, she remembered the first column. Meg struck while the iron was hot. He recited the entire multiplication table with her twice to give her a general feeling. But father, what's the use of memorizing this? Amy looked up at Meg in confusion after reciting it a few times. Oh, it's very useful. Meg smiled and pointed at the multiplication table. Look, a plate of Yeongju fried rice costs 600 copper coins, which is 6 gold coins. Grandpa Morbai ate 4 plates just now, so it's 4 times 6 is equal to 24. You can know the result directly without having to count them with your fingers. Don't you think it's very convenient? It's really 24 gold coins. Amy's eyes lit up. She had spent a lot of time calculating the 2,400 copper coins in her mind, but her father had just used the multiplication table to calculate it. This multiplication table was so useful. She said enthusiastically, "Father, I want to learn. I want to learn this multiplication table. If Remi learns it well, then she can really help father." "Okay, then we'll learn 3 columns today, and we'll learn the rest tomorrow." Meg nodded with a smile. The most important thing in learning was initiative and enthusiasm, and Amy didn't lack either. He believed that she would master the multiplication table very soon. Noon passed as Amy memorized the multiplication table. Except for Morbai, no other customer came into the restaurant, which showed how deserted this corner of the Aden Square was. But after selling 4 plates of fried rice, Meg was relieved. At least he didn't have to worry that the taste of Yeongju fried rice was not suitable for people in this world. And judging from Morbai's reaction, the effect of the fried rice to relieve muscle fatigue was also effective for him. Maybe he would be a regular customer in the future. This was good news. 342, 355, 36, 36, 36 is too difficult. Amy looked up at Meg with a sad face. This was the 5th time she couldn't memorize the multiplication table. Tears were rolling in her eyes. Okay, then you can memorize up to 355 today. Amy is already very good. Not many children can finish the first column on their first try. You can memorize the rest tomorrow. It's best to do it step by step. Meg put away the multiplication table and rubbed Amy's hair with a smile. This reminded him of a video he had seen in his previous life where a little girl had cried while memorizing the multiplication table. Sure enough, they were of the same age and had the same troubles. Really? Amy, who thought she was going to be scolded, heard Meg's words, and her eyes lit up again. Father actually said that she was better than the other children. Of course it's true. When have I ever lied to you? Meg looked into Amy's eyes and nodded seriously. Okay, father wouldn't lie to me. I'll memorize the rest tomorrow. Amy nodded, and a bright smile appeared on her face. She was more confident now. Meg put the multiplication table behind the counter. It was past mealtime, and no one would come to eat. Looking at Amy's messy hair, he walked to the door, flipped the open for business sign, and locked the door from the inside. Then he took Amy's little hand and said, "Let's go. Father will wash your hair and bathe you. You'll become a clean little fairy. Do we need to boil some hot water and bring a wooden bucket?" Amy looked up at Meg and asked. "No, there's a water pipe upstairs that directly pours out hot water. There's also a bathtub." Meg smiled and shook his head. "Is it like the faucet in the kitchen?" Amy asked in surprise. The thing that her father called a faucet was so magical. Clear and sweet water would come out just by turning it. It was like magic. "Yes, it is." Meg nodded and held her little hand as they went upstairs. Amy had only just begun to understand this world, so she was only curious about the modern things at home and did not feel too conflicted. Amy, who was seeing a bathtub for the first time, quickly got used to it. She sat in the bathtub and flopped her feet, holding the white foam in her hands and giggling. She looked at Meg and said happily, "Father, this bathtub is so fun. And these bubbles smell so good. It smells so good. Well, this is shower gel for bathing. Now I have shampoo in my hands. It's used to wash your hair. After washing it, your hair will be very clean and fragrant." Meg said with a smile. He clumsily rubbed the shampoo on Amy's hair with his hands and said softly, "Be good and close your eyes." It'll be very uncomfortable if the shampoo gets into your eyes. Okay, Amy wants to become as fragrant as father. Amy obediently closed her eyes. Meg gently rubbed Amy's hair. Although his movements were a little clumsy, he was very meticulous. He carefully separated the clumps of hair that were stuck together. In fact, Amy's hair was very smooth. Chapter 21. Please note that the system is not a shopping mall. Clothing is not provided, the system replied coldly. I'll pay for it. How much is a set of pajamas? 50 copper coins? 100 copper coins? Even if it's 2 gold coins, I'll still accept it, Meg said calmly as he looked at the remaining 616 copper coins. The system was silent for a while, then silently gave him a quote. A set of children's pajamas is 2 gold coins. A set of adult pajamas is 3 gold coins. A set of children's clothes is 3 gold coins. A set of chef's clothes is 3 gold coins. You can choose the color and style. Then I'd better get a set of children's pajamas and a set of chef's clothes first. Meg looked at Amy, who had just finished her bath and was starting to feel sleepy. The price wasn't too expensive, but the most important thing right now was to use the money he had on him to buy ingredients and complete the mission. Looking at the different styles and colors of children's pajamas that suddenly appeared in his mind, Meg was a little dazzled. He looked at Amy and asked, "What kind of pajamas do you want, Amy? What color do you like?" Amy likes the purple one. It would be great if there was a little bear on it. Amy said to Mag expectantly after thinking about it seriously. Father's magic was so powerful. The house and clothes he conjured were so beautiful, so she was also full of expectations for new clothes. Then it's this one. Mag's gaze landed on a purple nightgown, and his eyes lit up. It was a furry one-piece nightgown, and there were 2 cute bear ears on the hood. There was also an adorable brown bear in front of it. I'll go get the clothes for Amy. Meg looked at the system's notification that the clothes were already in the wardrobe. He told Amy and walked into the room to open the wardrobe. A set of cute bear pajamas and a brand new chef's clothes were already in the wardrobe. Meg folded the chef's clothes and placed them on the bed. He took the pajamas into the bathroom and looked at Amy with a smile. Do you like it? Wow, what a beautiful dress. Amy, who was wrapped in a towel, looked at the purple teddy bear costume in Meg's hands as he unfolded it. She nodded happily and said, Yes, Amy loves purple the most. It's so furry, and I'll turn into a teddy bear when I put it on. Amy loves it so much. Father, you're the best. Seeing how happy Amy was, Meg also felt very happy. He took a dry towel from the side and said, Then I'll help Amy dry her hair. You can change into your pajamas and take a nap. Okay. Amy nodded and poked her head over. She couldn't wait to put on her new clothes. Meg carefully dried Amy's hair with a dry towel and dried it with a hairdryer before helping her change into a new set of clothes. So soft and comfortable. Amy raised her hand and rubbed her face with her furry sleeve. Her eyes narrowed, and her little face was full of bliss. Meg looked at Amy. The furry purple one-piece pajamas made Amy look like a cute purple teddy bear. It made her skin look even fairer. Her silvery hair was draped over her shoulders and back, and her cute little pointy ears were white and sparkling. She was simply the perfect combination of human and elf. Let father carry you and take a look at our teddy bear Amy. Meg reached out and pulled Amy's hat over her head. Then, he picked her up and held her in front of the mirror. Wow, the teddy bear is here. I'm going to eat you. Amy looked at herself in the mirror as a teddy bear. She opened her mouth wide and waved her hands at Meg. Teddy bear, please spare me. Teddy bear, please spare me. Meg smiled and cooperated by taking a step back. It's okay. Don't be afraid. I can't bear to eat father. Amy opened her arms and hugged Meg's face. She kissed him on the cheek and stroked his hair to comfort him. Okay, don't be afraid. Our Amy has become fragrant. It's time to take a nap. Meg held back his laughter. The little girl was really cute. He sniffed her nose, carried Amy into the bedroom, and gently placed her on the bed. Amy can't sleep. Father, can you tell Amy a story? Amy lay on the bed, grabbed one of Meg's fingers, and shook her head. Okay, then I'll tell Amy the story of the ugly duckling. Meg nodded. He pulled a stool from the side and sat down beside the little bed. Okay, Amy wants to hear it. Amy nodded. In a distant and beautiful countryside, a mother duck was lying on a nest of duck eggs and hatching ducklings. Meg began to tell the story of the ugly duckling in a slightly low voice. Almost every child had heard of this fairy tale, and Meg had chosen this story for a reason. Amy's lack of confidence was partly because she felt that she was different from other human children and elves. Therefore, she was sometimes bullied and mocked, just like the little swan that was born in a flock of ducks. Therefore, he wanted to use this story to tell her that she was actually not strange, but special, and that she would be more outstanding than them in the future. Of course, with him around now, those storms of the outside world would definitely not fall on her. An ugly duckling broke out of its shell from a flock of ducks. Because it looked different from the ducks and all the animals around it, it was despised. She was chased and bitten by ducks, pecked by chickens, taunted by cats, and kicked by a female servant who was in charge of the chicken farm. She had no choice but to follow the river and leave that place alone. She endured a cold winter and almost died at the hands of a farmer's wife. In the end, the warm spring finally arrived. She looked at the white swans flying over from afar and flapped her wings desperately. Only then did she realize that she was a beautiful and noble white swan that could fly into the sky and be loved by others. Meg told the story in a low and slightly magnetic voice. Amy was completely immersed in the story. She clenched her little fists tightly as if she were worried and nervous about the ugly duckling. She heaved a sigh of relief after hearing that it had escaped, but she was soon nervous again because of the new danger. In the end, the ugly duckling finally turned into a beautiful white swan and flew into the sky. Only when it found its true companion did a happy smile appear on its face. So, Father, is Amy an ugly duckling? Will I really become a white swan when I grow up? Amy looked at Meg with anticipation in her eyes. No, Amy is a beautiful little swan now. When she grows up, she will become an even more noble and beautiful white swan. Meg shook his head with a smile. He gently stroked Amy's hair with his other hand, and gently said, "Furthermore, as long as Father is here, no one can hurt Amy." "Yes, I believe in Father." Amy looked into Meg's eyes and nodded with full trust. After a moment of hesitation, she said, "Amy has a small request." Meg looked at her with an encouraging gaze. "Can we raise an ugly duckling?" Amy asked softly. "Does Amy like white swans?" Meg was a little surprised. Little swans were not easy to get, but if Amy wanted to raise one, he could think of a way. Chapter 22. Meg opened his mouth, but didn't know what to say. Sure enough, the little foodie's way of thinking was completely different from that of ordinary children. He nodded with a smile and said, "Okay, I'll take you shopping tomorrow. Let's see if there's anyone selling an ugly duckling. We'll buy one and bring it home." "Father, you're so nice." Amy rubbed her head against Meg's hand happily. She was so sleepy that she fell asleep holding Meg's finger, murmuring about the roast goose. "Looks like she wants to eat roast goose. I'll have to get the recipe as soon as possible." Meg thought to himself as he slowly took his finger out of Amy's little hand. Looking at the little girl's cute sleeping face, he couldn't help but lean over and kiss her forehead. Then he got up and took his chef's suit from the bed to take a shower. Meg put Amy's little clothes into the washing machine first. When he came out of the shower, they were already washed. He hung them out of the window, and they would be dry tomorrow. Then he threw his own clothes into the washing machine as well. Meg went downstairs and tidied up the kitchen. Then he took a pen and a paper and sat down at the counter, thinking seriously. The most important thing now was to complete the mission, which meant that Meg had to earn at least 3,000 gold coins, which meant that he had to sell 500 plates of Yeongju fried rice. Meg had neglected a very important point before. He could buy the ingredients and not use them first. That way, the amount of the mission would be cut in half, and the pressure would be reduced a lot. Of course, selling 500 plates of Yeongju fried rice in 10 days was also a difficult task for him. After all, he had only sold 4 plates of Yeongju fried rice so far, and they were all sold to the same person. Do I have to go out and advertise myself? Meg wrote a 4 on the first line. Then he put down the pen and looked in the direction of the door, feeling a little annoyed. There were only a few children running by in the square outside the door. This location was really too remote. If it was at the other end of the square, the restaurant's appearance alone would be enough to attract a lot of customers. But now, not many people could even see this restaurant. Let's hope there will be more guests tonight. Meg walked to the door and unlocked it before turning over the sign on the door. Unknowingly, it was already 4 o'clock. There were no customers, and Amy was sleeping, so Meg could only sit behind the counter and stare blankly into space. He combed through the memories in his mind and slowly turned the useful things in those memories into his own, understanding the structure of the entire continent and the races. Sure enough, this world was much more dangerous than he had imagined. Even in Chaos City, which was governed by the Grey Temple, fights were still common. Furthermore, as long as no one died, the punishment wouldn't be too severe. It looks like even if I can't return to my peak strength, I'll have to at least improve my physical fitness to be able to protect Amy and the restaurant. Meg thought to himself. After all, since the opening of this restaurant, he was destined not to keep a low profile anymore. In the plaza outside the restaurant, a tall and thin elf wearing a silver-white dress with golden edges stopped in her tracks. Her light blue eyes looked in the direction of the restaurant with surprise. Hey, why is this restaurant here? And, it's so beautiful. Sally looked at the restaurant and the entire 2-story building with amazement on her beautiful face. She had been chosen by her family through marriage, and she didn't want to entrust her future to others at such a young age, so she had left the family overnight without telling her father, who was the chief of the family. She had traveled all the way west from the Wind Forest to the legendary Chaos City. She had seen many interesting things in Chaos City during the 2 days she had been wandering around, but because all kinds of races lived here, she was still not used to it. And she knew that her father must have sent someone to look for her by now, so she deliberately avoided the inns and restaurants run by elves in Chaos City. However, the restaurants and inns run by other races were a little awkward for her, who was used to living in beautiful forest castles. Last night, she had stayed in an inn run by a human woman. It wasn't very luxurious, but it was very clean, and only women had stayed there before. The problem of sleeping was solved, but eating was another problem. Sally walked around the famous Aden Square. Most of the restaurants looked very greasy, and there were even all kinds of insects flying around. The tables and chairs were densely arranged, and it was as if they were trying to fill up the entire restaurant. All of the races were sitting right next to each other, which made her flinch a little. She was a noble elf. There was no way she would sit at the same table as an orc, let alone sit next to a dwarf. She had digested the 2 spirit fruits she had eaten in the morning. She had walked around the Aden Square, and her stomach was growling. But she would rather starve herself in a restaurant like that. Just as she was about to go to the elven restaurant she had seen before, regardless of whether her whereabouts would be exposed or not, she found this beautiful restaurant in the corner of the Aden Square. This restaurant was even more beautiful than her castle. The entire wall of transparent crystal was so clear, without a trace of impurity, and was polished to a thin and smooth surface. Even the transparent crystal in the Elven Queen's castle was less than half the size of this one, and it was carefully placed in her bedroom. Here, however, it was just a wall separating the restaurant from the rest. What a luxurious person the owner of this restaurant was. Through the crystal wall, she could see the interior of the restaurant. The brownish-yellow wooden tables were neatly placed at a distance from each other. Although there were 16 tables, it wouldn't be crowded even if they were full. Of course, what attracted her the most was the 4 amber chandeliers in the restaurant. The crystals were carved into such exquisite lamps, and the amber crystals were strung together. It was so dreamy. It would be great if I could go in and have a meal. This idea suddenly popped up in Sally's mind, and began to tempt her like a demon. But she was still a little hesitant. There was no sign on the door that said elves were only allowed in. What if dwarfs and orcs came in and sat next to her? At this moment, her stomach suddenly growled. Hunger immediately washed away all other thoughts in her mind. She drew the longbow on her back and walked toward the restaurant, her face full of confidence and determination. In Chaos City, Strength was everything. She believed that her archery skills would be enough to make those guys leave the restaurant. The bell at the door rang, interrupting Mag's train of thought. He looked up at the door, and a hint of surprise appeared on his face. The person who had entered was a tall and slender elf. Her light blonde hair was tied into a neat ponytail. Her skin was fair, and her face was delicate. Small pointed ears stood on either side of her face, and her light blue eyes had a hint of nobility. She was wearing a light silver dress embroidered with gold thread, revealing her delicate collarbone and a pair of slender white legs. She carried a silver longbow on her back, and a quiver full of arrows hung from her waist. Chapter 23. Sally was just about to look around the restaurant when she heard Meg's voice, and a hint of surprise appeared in her eyes. This was obviously a human male. However, unlike those sloppily dressed men with stubble on their faces, this man looked very clean. He had neat short hair, no stubble on his chin, and a mustache on his upper lip that didn't disgust her. It added a touch of maturity to him, and his black eyes looked very deep. His clothes were simple black and white, but the cut was very neat and tidy. More importantly, there wasn't a speck of dust on them, which gave her a good impression of Meg. Although this man was a little thin, he was like a sword when he stood. She had only felt this kind of aura on a human knight who came to the elven race many years ago. The heavy sword was unparalleled, and it left a deep impression on her. However, the man in front of her was clearly different. He didn't have that kind of sharp aura. Instead, he was more reserved and steady, and didn't look like a knight who could hold a heavy sword. Humans were a relatively easy race for elves to accept. Of course, that didn't include sloppy humans. Sally nodded in response to Meg's greeting, and then continued to look around the restaurant. The restaurant's decor was a little special. It was a mixture of human and other races. For example, there was a grey canyon painted on the wall. It was the famous Valley of Wind in the Wind Forest. Sally had grown up there, so she could recognize it at a glance. A little further away was a large human city. She had seen a similar painting in her father's study. It should be the capital of the Roth Empire, Rodu. There were a few other paintings that she could roughly guess which race was famous. Not to mention other things, these paintings alone were enough to prove that the owner of this restaurant was very knowledgeable. The exquisite chandelier she saw outside was even more exquisite up close. The carvings were so delicate that it was as if it had always been like this. Meg was also looking at this elf quietly. This was the first time he had seen a female elf. Her facial features were well defined, and she looked up at the chandelier, revealing her slender neck like a proud white swan. When Amy grows up, she'll definitely be prettier than her. Meg thought to himself. He couldn't help but smile as he looked at this beautiful elf with admiration. Of course, that was all. Sally's fingers slid across the surface of the table. She didn't feel the slightest grease. It was as clean as the tables and chairs at home. This calmed her down quite a bit. Sally couldn't help but take a look at Meg. This man looked to be in his 30s. Compared to the lifespan of elves, which was 800 years, a human's lifespan of only a few decades seemed so short. However, the fact that he owned such an exquisite restaurant made her curious and curious. Moreover, although this man's gaze had been fixed on her from the moment she entered the room, she did not feel much repulsion because she did not feel the slightest hint of obscenity from his gaze. Other than politeness, the rest was admiration. Every beautiful woman wouldn't feel repulsed by a handsome man's admiring gaze, and Sally was no exception. She put down her longbow and quiver on the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down. She looked at Meg and asked politely, "Excuse me, what do you have to eat here? There's a menu on the table. You can take a look." Meg pointed at the menu in her hand. Sally took the menu and opened it. The comfortable material of the cover made her even more satisfied with the small details in the restaurant. However, when her expectant gaze fell on the empty menu, she was stunned. It was empty. No, there was a small line of words at the top. Such a big restaurant, decorated so beautifully, only sells one dish. Sally suddenly felt that she had entered a strange place. Was this the human scam that the wet nurse always mentioned? Yangju fried rice, 600 copper coins per plate? After reading the line clearly, Sally was stunned for a moment. She read it again carefully to make sure that she was not mistaken. Then she slowly raised her head and looked at Meg. She narrowed her eyes slightly, trying to see if this man was a scammer. She wouldn't be surprised if a dish in such a luxurious and exquisite restaurant was sold for 10 gold coins. However, he actually only sold one dish, and it was listed on the menu alone. Moreover, he directly set the price at 600 copper coins. This was not a cheap price. Last night, she stayed in the hotel, and it only cost her 100 copper coins per night. Moreover, she had heard of many human delicacies when she was with the elves. What was this so-called Yeongju fried rice? Was it really worth 600 copper coins? She wanted to find the answer from Meg's face. However, she soon gave up. Meg kept a calm and indifferent smile on his face, which made people feel comfortable and distant. However, she could not tell what he was thinking. If it were before, Sally would not have cared about the 600 copper coins. The environment alone was worth spending a gold coin to sit here for a while. But this time, she only brought a dozen dragon coins with her in a hurry. She had already spent a few of them along the way. She didn't want to run away from home because she didn't have enough money, so she had to be frugal. 600 copper coins per plate was too extravagant for her now. Moreover, this dish did not seem to be very big. She might not even be full after one plate. Mr. Mac, I'm here again. Give me 2 plates of Yeongju fried rice, one after the other. It's best to eat it while it's hot. At this time, the bell at the door rang, and Morbai's loud and clear voice came in. Okay, please wait a moment. Meg was a bit surprised to see Morbai. He must have taken a shower and changed his clothes before coming. He was wearing a short grey coat and trousers, and his shoes were clean and fresh black cloth shoes. He did not bring the heavy hammer that he carried at noon with him, which made Meg feel a bit touched. Of course, of course. Morbai nodded with a smile. He looked around the restaurant and was a bit disappointed when he did not see Amy. He glanced at Sally, who was sitting next to him with a longbow in her hand, and quickly withdrew his gaze. He found a random table, pulled out a chair, and sat down. Take your time. You can tell me when you want to order, Meg said to Sally, who was still hesitating. Then he turned around and went into the kitchen to prepare the fried rice. Sure enough, regular customers were the best. Okay. Sally, who had been vigilant since Morbai entered the restaurant, nodded. Seeing that Morbai did not stare at her like those rude dwarfs in her impression, she slowly let go of the longbow in her hand. Shall we go or stay for a plate? Sally was a bit hesitant. She glanced sideways at Morbai, who was sitting next to her and waiting patiently for his food to be served. When he came in, he could not wait to order his food. Is this Yeongju fried rice really that good? Chapter 24. Meg quickly finished a plate of Yeongju fried rice and carried it out of the kitchen. It's so beautiful. Is this Yeongju fried rice? Sally's eyes immediately lit up at the sight of the platter in Mag's hands. There were golden eggs wrapped in rice, and all types of ingredients that had been sliced into rice-sized pieces. There were all types of colors mixed together on the platter, and there wasn't even the slightest hint of clutter. Instead, it was like a piece of art that had been meticulously arranged, and it was refreshing and appetizing. When Mag passed by her with the plate of fried rice, a rich aroma wafted past her. She couldn't help but take a whiff. It was the aroma of eggs, mixed with the aroma of all kinds of ingredients, which made her even hungrier. She couldn't help but turn to look in Morbai's direction. Your Yeongju fried rice. Meg put the plate in front of Morbai and put a spoon on the edge of the plate. Okay. Morbai stared at the plate of Yeongju fried rice in front of him and couldn't move his eyes away. He couldn't help but take a deep breath of the aroma. Although he had eaten 4 plates of Yeongju fried rice at noon, he didn't feel bored at all. Instead, he wanted another plate. Therefore, after finishing his work in the afternoon, he hurried over after washing up and changing his clothes. He picked up the spoon and scooped a spoonful of egg fried rice into his mouth. He chewed carefully, and the delicious taste of all kinds of ingredients bloomed in his mouth. It flowed down his throat like a warm current, and Morbai felt his whole body become warm. The little tiredness accumulated in the afternoon was quickly wiped away, and he felt so comfortable that he wanted to cry out. Delicious. Even if I eat it 100 times, I still feel it's delicious. After swallowing, Morbai couldn't help but take a second spoonful. One mouthful after another, he just couldn't stop. However, compared to the ravenous appetite he had at noon, he chewed every bite of the Yeongju fried rice carefully and savored the freshness and taste of every ingredient. This way of eating satisfied his taste buds greatly and made him feel that the dish was even more delicious. Sally heard herself swallowing and panicked. Fortunately, Meg had gone back into the kitchen to make a second plate of Yeongju fried rice. Morbai, who was wholeheartedly immersed in the fried rice in front of him, didn't pay attention to what she was doing. Is it really that good? Looking at Morbai, who was eating the colorful fried rice spoonful by spoonful with a happy expression, Sally felt a little apprehensive. The aroma in the air kept stirring her heart. Her expression became a little complicated. She subconsciously tightened her grip on the purse at her waist, where there were only 12 dragon coins and 8 gold coins left. Her reason was reminding her that she couldn't spend money carelessly. However, the smell was really fragrant. Moreover, looking at the bearded dwarf, who had always been rude in her eyes, eating, she actually wanted to take a bite of his fried rice. This feeling made her feel a little ashamed. I'm a noble elf. How can I have such a strange thought? Sally couldn't help but clench her fists, but she still couldn't take her eyes off the plate of fried rice. How painful. Morbai finally finished his plate of Yeongju fried rice. There wasn't even a grain of rice left on the plate. He put down the spoon, still wanting more. When he looked up, he happened to meet the eyes of Sally, who had been staring at him the whole time. He paused for a moment, then smiled and said, Mr. Max Yeongju fried rice is really good. You'll regret it if you don't try it. Sally turned her head away. Her pride as an elf made it impossible for her to accept the food recommended by a dwarf. However, looking at the menu in front of her, she felt conflicted again. Maybe he hasn't eaten anything good before, so he thinks it's delicious. Nanny said that humans touch the ingredients directly with their hands when cooking. Is the food that has been touched by that man really edible? Even if it costs 600 copper coins, it shouldn't be a problem, right? I still have 12 dragon coins. I'll just spend them sparingly. Morbai shrugged and didn't take it to heart. He continued to look forward to his second plate of Yeongju fried rice. Anyway, the elves had this problem. They always felt that they were nobler than other races. Judging from the color of this elven girl's hair, he could tell that she was from one of the elven royal families. It was already good that she could tolerate sitting in the same restaurant with him. After eating 4 servings of Yeongju fried rice at noon, Morbai felt as if his body had been cleansed. He felt comfortable all over, but maybe because he had eaten too much at once, he felt a little full. 2 servings at night would be just right. Father. At this moment, a young and somewhat misty voice came from behind the counter. Morbai's eyes suddenly lit up, and he looked at the counter expectantly. That little girl was so cute. Although he had been despised by her several times at noon, and had even been tricked into eating 4 servings of Yeongju fried rice, when he heard her voice, he felt that those things were nothing at all. Half of the reason why he was in such a hurry to take a shower and come to the restaurant was that he wanted to eat the delicious Yeongju fried rice, and the other half was that he wanted to see that cute little girl. Sally was also a little surprised to hear the voice, and she turned toward the counter to find that it sounded like a little girl. Was she the owner's daughter? While Sally was thinking, a little girl in purple fluffy clothes came out from behind the counter. She turned her head and looked outside. When her eyes fell on Sally, she froze for a second, as if she thought she was mistaken. She raised her hands and rubbed her eyes. When she looked again, her eyes widened. She turned her head and shouted to the kitchen, "Father, look! What a beautiful elf sister! So cute!" Sally felt as if her heart had stopped beating for a moment. The way the little girl in the purple bear raised her hands and rubbed her eyes was so cute that she looked like a cute bear. No, she was much cuter than Xiao Xiong. Her fair and sweet little face made people have the urge to pinch it, and her excited words made her blush a little. Children's words carried no harm, but why did she feel so happy when she heard them? Is this little girl a half-elf? However, Sally's eyes soon fell on Amy's pointed ears, which were faintly discernible under her long silver hair. She couldn't help but reveal a look of surprise. Meg just came out with the second plate of Yeongju fried rice. After putting it on Morbai's table, he stroked the ahoj on his head and said with a smile, "Amy, you woke up so soon." "Yes, I woke up, and then I was hungry. I wanted to eat Father's rainbow fried rice, so I came downstairs by myself." Amy nodded. She was still very excited as she pointed at Sally and said, "And that elf sister is so beautiful. It's the first time I've seen such a beautiful girl." Chapter 25. Sally was caught off guard by Mag's question, and she faltered momentarily. She looked at the sincere expression on Mag's face, as well as the expectant expression on the little girl's face beside him, and she was feeling rather conflicted. This cute little half-elf girl was Meg's daughter, which meant that he once had an elf lover. With the long lifespan of the elves, they rarely chose to be friends with humans. The feeling of watching their friends die while they continued to live for a long time was too painful. It was even rarer for them to become lovers because the pain of separation would be doubled. However, love was just that unreasonable. That was why half-elves, who were half-elves and half-elves, appeared in this world. The elves were a proud race. They believed that half-elves were no longer pure. Although they wouldn't do anything to half-elves, they didn't admit that they belonged to the elves and weren't allowed to enter the wind forest. Humans were relatively more accepting of half-elves because half-elves only had a lifespan of 200 years, which was closer to that of humans. However, their pointed ears, which were different from that of humans, were often pointed at by others. It could be said that half-elves were destined to have a rough life from birth unless their parents were strong enough to provide a strong protective umbrella between the two races. However, it seemed that no one had been able to do that. The man in front of her, who was half squatting on the ground and looking at her with sincerity, seemed to be planning to do that. The determination in his eyes moved her a little. The little girl beside him, who was wearing a cute little bear dress, had an expectant look on her face. Her silver hair was so dazzling. Only the elves of the royal family had pure silver hair. It reminded her of someone she hadn't seen in a long time. Of course, there was no way they could be related. However, the little girl really was very beautiful, and she had inherited all of her parents' strengths. After a moment of hesitation, Sally nodded with a smile, and said, "That's right, you'll be as beautiful as me when you grow up." "Really? Father, can I really be as beautiful as Big Sister when I grow up?" Amy's face was full of surprise and disbelief. She raised her little hand to cover her slightly open mouth and looked at Meg in disbelief. "Of course it's true. Big Sister said it herself. Little Mi will definitely be very beautiful when she grows up, even more beautiful than a white swan." Meg looked into her eyes and nodded. "Yeah, I also think that the little girl will be very beautiful when she grows up, even more beautiful than the elves," Morbai said with an honest smile as he held a spoon in one hand and looked at Amy. "That's great. Xiao Mi is so happy. Xiao Mi wants to grow up quickly and be as beautiful as Big Sister." Amy looked at the smiles on the faces of the three adults and completely believed their words. It turned out that she would also be very beautiful when she grew up and would not be the monster that the other children talked about. She happily spread her arms and ran around the restaurant. Meg looked at the happy Amy with a gratified smile on his face. There was nothing more important than seeing Amy happy. He hoped that the things he had done could slowly make up for the hurt she had suffered in the past. He turned to look at Sally and said gratefully, "Thank you." "You're welcome." Sally looked at the smiles on the faces of the father and daughter, and her mood unconsciously improved a lot. "At least this is a good father." She looked at Meg and nodded. "I'll also have a plate of Yeongju fried rice." "Okay, please wait a moment." Meg nodded and looked at Morbai again to thank him. "Don't mention it. I'm telling the truth. Mr. Mac is so lucky to have such a cute daughter." Morbai waved his hand and said enviously, "Please enjoy your meal." Meg smiled and nodded. He turned and went into the kitchen to make a new plate of fried rice. Yes, he also felt that he was so lucky. Otherwise, how could he have such a cute daughter? "Hello, Grandpa Morbai the dwarf." Amy ran around the restaurant happily and greeted more by. Then she climbed onto the chair opposite Sally and sat down. She rested her chin on her hands and asked curiously, "Big Sister Elf, what's your name? Where did you come from?" If someone else had asked Sally this question, her first reaction would have been to grab her longbow. However, when she saw the curious expression on the cute little girl's face, she couldn't help but answer softly, "Sally, from the Wind Forest." "Big Sister Sally, my name is Amy. The Wind Forest is the place where many elves live, right?" Amy's eyes lit up. She said expectantly, "There must be many beautiful sisters like you there, right?" "Yes, there are many." Sally nodded with a smile. She was much happier to be called beautiful by a little girl than to hear it from other people. Meg listened to Amy and Sally's conversation in the kitchen with a smile on his face. It seemed that the little girl was curious about elves even though she didn't talk about it often. Sally wasn't impatient or arrogant. Instead, she answered Amy's childish questions patiently. She didn't even hide the questions about the Wind Forest. Meg came out with a plate of Yangju fried rice and put it in front of Sally. He smiled and said, "Here's your Yangju fried rice." "Thank you." Sally replied politely. Her attention was completely attracted by the Yangju fried rice in front of her. The aroma of the eggs was mixed with the aroma of various ingredients, and it was even stronger than before. She couldn't help but swallow her saliva. At this moment, she couldn't care less if this was against the etiquette of her daily studies. The food of the elves was relatively simple. Most of them were spirit fruits. Even when they cooked each ingredient separately so that they wouldn't let other ingredients ruin the taste of other ingredients. She had never tried cooking in which 7 or 8 ingredients were all put together and then fried with oil. She had never even eaten any oil other than the meat itself. But looking at the Yangju fried rice in front of her, she didn't feel greasy at all, even though it was a little oily. What surprised Sally even more was Meg's knife skills. He cut all the ingredients into the size of rice grains, including the green beans. It was impossible to do without thousands of practice. Sally was already looking forward to the Yangju fried rice even before eating it. She had never seen anyone who could make a dish so delicate and match so well with each other. "Sister Sally, try it. Father's rainbow fried rice is super delicious." Amy sat opposite her and looked at her expectantly. At the same time, she added in a low voice, "I heard your stomach growling." Chapter 26. Sally felt as if she had plunged into a sea of delicious food, and was instantly filled with delicious and warm feelings. The egg wrapped around the rice was so fragrant and tender. The mellow ham, the sweet and crispy winter bamboo shoots, the sweet and fragrant green beans. The taste of each ingredient was so distinct, yet they all blended together perfectly in this mouthful. She tasted the prawns. The fresh flavor of the prawns overflowed in her mouth, as if she had tasted the sea. This was the kind of freshness that was hard to find even in the Wind Valley. The prawns that were kept alive by magic were not as fresh and tender as this. Even she had only tasted such fresh prawns 2 years ago when she followed her grandfather to the seaside in the north of the Wind Forest, but it was still not as fresh and tender as the prawns she was eating right now. Where did this restaurant owner get such fresh and delicious prawns? If they were transported from the seaside to Chaos City, the price of a single prawn would be more than 5 gold coins. There was more than one prawn in this plate of fried rice, but he only sold it for 600 copper coins. Was this restaurant owner stupid? A trace of doubt flashed through her mind. When she bit into the tender egg and touched the sweet rice with the tip of her tongue, she was stunned, and then suddenly opened her eyes. This taste. This is the taste of the spring of life. Although she was not a member of the royal family, her clan was very noble among the elves, so she had been baptized by the spring of life many times. She even drank a small cup of the spring of life at her coming-of-age ceremony, so she was very sensitive and familiar with the taste of the holy spring of the elves. However, she actually tasted the spring of life in a restaurant owned by a human in Chaos City. This absurd feeling made her unable to wrap her head around it for a while. She even wondered if she was hallucinating because she was too homesick. As she chewed the rice, the sweet taste of the rice along with the taste of all kinds of ingredients kept hitting her taste buds. Among them, the unique fragrance of the spring of life was so clear, confirming her guess over and over again. After swallowing, a warm current flowed through her meridians and spread throughout her body, and the tiredness and hunger that had accumulated from days of traveling quickly disappeared. This is definitely the spring of life. Sally was completely certain. Her rationality told her that she should point her bow at this man and ask him about the origin of the spring of life. But, this Yeongju fried rice is so delicious that I can't spare any time to do this. The chefs in her castle were the best in the entire clan. She had attended many banquets in the royal palace, and even tasted the dishes cooked by the king of the Roth Empire when he brought his chefs to the elven race as guests. However, compared to this Yeongju fried rice, those seemingly exquisite dishes seemed tasteless. Such delicious Yeongju fried rice was made by a human being, and a man at that. Another mouthful? Sally felt that there was a devil tempting her, but she chose not to resist. The spoon touched the plate, and the second spoonful of fried rice was already in her mouth. She closed her eyes again, savoring the special taste of each ingredient. The holy spring of the elves, the duty of the elves, all these things were thrown to the back of her mind. There was only one word in her mind: eat, eat, eat. After one bite, she took another. Although her deep-rooted etiquette made her restrain herself from wolfing down the food, compared to her usual slow chewing, she had never been like this before. She had completely thrown her previous doubts to the back of her mind. Mag looked on silently from the side with a smile on his face. As expected, it was a feeling of pride and satisfaction to see a customer completely immersed in his cooking. Perhaps this was the thrill of conquering someone's taste buds. As expected, it was much more interesting than conquering a woman. Amy's face was also full of pride. This was made by father, who could make the best rainbow fried rice in the world. Even big sister elves fell in love with this taste after one bite. Sally finished the Yeongju fried rice as if there was no one else around. When she put the spoon on the plate and was about to take another bite, she suddenly realized that there was not a single grain of rice left on the plate. It's finished just like that. Sally was stunned. She felt as if she had just started eating. Looking at the plate, which could almost reflect her shadow, she felt a little ashamed that she had not maintained her elegance in front of others. Fortunately, she resisted the urge to lick the plate. However, how could one serving of such delicious food be enough? Sally looked up at Meg and said expectantly, "Boss, please give me another serving." "Okay, please wait a moment." Meg replied with a smile and turned to walk to the kitchen. Sure enough, even an elegant elf could not resist the temptation of Yeongju fried rice. However, he was also a little worried. This rice was grown with the spring of life. If she tasted it, he did not know if there would be any trouble. "It's so delicious," Morbai said with a satisfied expression as he put down the spoon in his hand. 2 servings of Yeongju fried rice were just enough to fill his stomach, and all his fatigue was gone. He had not felt so relaxed in a long time. It was so good. "Grandpa Dwarf Morbai, do you want 2 more servings?" Amy asked expectantly. Looking at Amy's big expectant eyes, Morbai almost could not help but nod. He quickly waved his hand and said, "No, 2 servings are just enough for tonight. I can even drink some wine when I go back." "What a beautiful day." "Okay, then 2 servings will be 2 and 62. That's 12 gold coins in total." Although Amy was a little disappointed, she quickly regained her cheerful expression. She jumped down from the chair, walked up to Morbai, and held out her 2 little hands. "Pay up." "Well, you calculated quickly tonight." Morbai was a little surprised, but he still counted 12 gold coins from his wallet and put them in Amy's little hands. "Goodbye, Mr. Mac." Morbai stood up and said to Meg in the kitchen. Then he looked at Amy and said, "Goodbye, little one." "Goodbye," Meg said with a smile in the kitchen. 1, 2, 3. "Goodbye, Grandpa Dwarf Morbai," Amy answered without raising her head. Her eyes were shining as she counted the gold coins. This prefix. Morbai's mouth twitched. It sounded a little weird, but he smiled and went out. Who is this man? Sally looked at Meg in the kitchen. Although she could only see the side of his face through the crystal, she could not take her eyes off him. A luxurious restaurant, delicious fried rice, fresh prawns, spring of life, and a cute half-elf daughter. How many secrets does this seemingly ordinary man have? Or what kind of story does he have? Chapter 27. Meg came out with Sally's second plate of Yeongju fried rice. He put it in front of her and said with a smile, "Please enjoy." "Thank you." Sally answered politely. She picked up her spoon, and all she could see was the fried rice in front of her. She scooped up a spoonful and put it into her mouth. This time, she ate a little slower, enjoying the taste of the various ingredients slowly merging in her mouth. This novel experience made her feel a little intoxicated. "Father, 12 gold coins. I calculated it right away." Amy held the gold coins in her hands and looked up at Meg with an expression that said, "Praise me, praise me." "Well, our Amy is so awesome. You put what you learned into practice. You did the right thing by taking the money. It seems that you have mastered what you learned today." Meg rubbed Amy's hair with a smile and took the gold coins from her. She is indeed a very smart child. "Yes, I will be more serious tomorrow." Amy nodded happily. She was very happy. It turned out that the multiplication table was not that difficult. It was just that 3 and 6, 3 and 6. "Oh, I will think about it tomorrow." She looked up at Meg and said, "Father, I am hungry too. I will make you fried rice." Meg nodded. He put the money in the locked drawer and went into the kitchen. Remi sat down across from Sally in a well-behaved manner. She watched Sally eat her fried rice with an elegant posture, and tried her best to sit in a more dignified manner as well. Sally, who was completely immersed in the delicious fried rice, didn't notice Amy sitting across from her until she finished the last mouthful of rice. The little girl even imitated her and sat with her legs crossed. She couldn't help but smile. "Sister Sally, you look so good when you eat," Amy said when she saw Sally finish eating. "You can do it when you grow up." Sally nodded with a smile. She was a little surprised when she said that. When she was in the elven tribe, she didn't like little elves, but now she couldn't help but encourage her like an elder. "Yes, yes." Amy nodded happily and asked, "Sister Sally, are you full?" "Yes." Sally nodded and put down the spoon. In order to maintain her figure, she hadn't eaten so much for a long time, but she couldn't help it today. "That'll be a total of 262 gold coins. Please pay up." Amy's eyes lit up as she extended her hands to Sally and placed them on the table. Meg happened to come out with a plate of Yeongju fried rice. Seeing this scene, he wanted to laugh. It seemed that the little guy really liked to collect money. 1 dragon coin and 2 gold coins. Sally took out a dragon coin and 2 gold coins from her purse and put them in Amy's hand. She hesitated for a moment before letting go, but then she remembered that she had just tasted something that she had never tasted before, so she quickly let go. This was definitely a good deal for her. Picking up the longbow and quiver on the table, Sally looked at Meg with narrowed eyes and said, "I'm curious why this Yeongju fried rice smells like the spring of life." "I don't know what you mean, miss. This Yeongju fried rice doesn't contain the spring of life." Meg smiled and shook his head calmly. He wasn't lying, but it seemed that this girl's identity was indeed not simple. She actually tasted the spring of life. Sally stared into Meg's eyes for a while. She didn't see any panic in those deep eyes. She nodded and said, "Mr. Mac, right? The Yeongju fried rice is very good. I'll come again next time." Then she turned and walked out of the door. "Take care." Meg put down the plate in his hand. He didn't feel much panic. After all, since the opening of this restaurant, it was destined that he couldn't keep a low profile. It wasn't a secret that the rice smelled like the spring of life. As long as the system's farm wasn't raided, it would be fine. The system wouldn't let him be beaten to death, right? The system is not responsible for the host's safety. The system's voice sounded in Meg's mind. "I've died once. I have nothing to fear," Meg replied indifferently in his mind. He put the fried rice in his hand in front of Amy. "Host, please take your life seriously." The system was silent for a while before it responded. "Actually, I don't want to die that much. System, can you help me improve my physical fitness? Just make it 10 or 20. If I can tear apart a giant dragon with my bare hands, who would dare to cause trouble in the restaurant in the future? Then I can cook in peace and work hard to become the god of cookery, Meg said matter-of-factly. This time, the system was silent for a long time. After a while, it replied, the system doesn't have the authority to do so. To improve your physical fitness, you need to trigger and complete the corresponding mission. After the system's evaluation, it suggests that the host start with his daughter to improve the restaurant's safety. Amy? Meg stared blankly for a moment. Looking at Amy, who was about to take a bite of the dragon coin, he couldn't help but laugh. However, the system's evaluation should be reliable. Could it be the blue-violet fireball from this morning? Father, it's a dragon coin. At noon, you said that 10 gold coins could be exchanged for 1 dragon coin. I didn't make a mistake, did I? Amy looked up at Meg. There was a small row of teeth marks on the edge of the dragon coin. That's right. That's great. Meg nodded with a smile. He put this matter aside for now and reached out to take the dragon coin. It was about the same size as a gold coin, but there was a pure white jade inlaid in the middle. There was also a small golden dragon carved on the edge of the jade. It was slightly heavier than a gold coin and was the highest currency on the continent. Then Amy will start eating. After being praised, Amy happily picked up the spoon and started eating the fried rice. As she ate, her body swayed slightly. She looked very happy. Meg put away the dragon coin and put it in the drawer. Seeing that there were no guests outside, he went into the kitchen and cooked a plate of Yeongju fried rice for dinner. After eating a bowl of Yeongju fried rice, Meg felt warm all over and his fatigue was swept away. Father, I feel a little hot again. Amy finished the half bowl of fried rice that Meg had made for her. She put down the bowl and looked at Meg with a little unease. Are you feeling hot again? Meg was a little nervous when he heard that. Thinking of the situation in the morning, he quickly said, Amy, don't panic. Think about the fireball from this morning and release the fire in your body. Release it. Amy thought seriously. She raised her hand, and a blue-violet flame rose up with a whoosh. The water in the air evaporated instantly, as if a white hole had been burned out. Sitting across the table, Meg couldn't help but take a few steps back. Looking at the fire in Amy's hand slowly becoming smaller and smaller, he couldn't hide the surprise in his eyes. Chapter 28. Amy had only eaten 3 plates of Yeongju fried rice since the morning, but the temperature of the fireball she released now was much higher than that in the morning. Her growth speed was simply unbelievable. Moreover, if eating could improve one's strength, then becoming stronger would no longer be a hassle. All she needed to do was to eat every day. Father, do you want to play with fire? Amy looked at the dancing flame in her hand and smiled like a little girl who wanted to share her toy with others. No, thank you. The temperature of this flame is too high. Remember, you can't use it on anyone other than bad people. Otherwise, you could easily hurt others. Mag hurriedly waved his hand. This flame was not fun. Bad people? Amy thought carefully. If they don't pay for their food, they're bad people, right? Yes, that's called eating and dashing. They're bad people. Meg nodded. He didn't like people who dined and dashed in his previous life. Now that he was the owner of a restaurant, he hated them even more. Amy nodded seriously. Okay, I'll remember. If anyone doesn't pay for their food, I'll burn them. Okay, then I'll count on you to protect the restaurant. Meg couldn't help laughing. Maybe he would meet such customers in the future. If they were afraid of Amy's fireball, she could really become the restaurant's security. After all, the system was quite reliable except for the fact that it had no principles when it came to money. Mag cleared the table and went into the kitchen. Should I pretend I don't know about this? Or should I inform the family's contact in Chaos City as soon as possible? In the square outside the restaurant, under a big tree, Sally hadn't left yet. She looked at the brightly lit restaurant with a conflicted expression. But this Yeongju fried rice is really good. If I had money, I'd eat it 3 times a day. But now, I can only eat 1 plate every now and then. After hesitating for a while, she thought about the Yeongju fried rice she had just finished. Thinking about it, she still felt the taste of the sea in her mouth. I don't care. I've just escaped, and I have no obligation to do these things. Sally waved her hand, as if she wanted to throw away all her worries, and carried the longbow on her back. The owner probably didn't care about this at all. Otherwise, he wouldn't have put the spring of life in the Yeongju fried rice that was sold for 6 gold coins, even if it was diluted countless times. Amy's, what an interesting pair of father and daughter. Sally took another look at the restaurant before turning around and walking towards the exit of the square. Meg used the dishwasher to wash the plates and spoons. Then, he and Amy sat on the bar stool behind the counter and waited for the customers to arrive. There were more customers in the evening than in the afternoon. However, when the customers saw the price of Yeongju fried rice, which was 600 copper coins per plate, they all shook their heads and left. Meg wanted to drag them along and tell them about the origins of the ingredients, so that they would know how cheap it was to spend 600 copper coins on a plate of Yeongju fried rice. Of course, as a candidate to become the god of cookery, he restrained himself. Such behavior was contrary to his previous mission. Although there were only 2 customers today, he sold 8 plates of Yeongju fried rice. For the first day of business, Meg was actually quite satisfied. At 8 o'clock, after seeing off the 8th customer who shook his head and left because the price was too expensive, Meg walked to the door, flipped over the closed sign on the door, and turned off the advertising light outside. The first day of business had come to an end. Father, are we not selling rainbow fried rice today? Amy put away the fireball in her hand and asked Meg. Yes, let's call it a day. Meg nodded with a smile. He took out the gold coins from the drawer and counted them. There were 20 gold coins, 1 dragon coin, and 12 copper coins. 18 gold coins were automatically deducted by the system when he bought the ingredients in the evening. This was only the first day of business. Last night, he was still a poor man with only 2 copper coins in his pocket. So many gold coins. Amy looked at the gold coins on the table with shining eyes. Then she looked up at Meg and said, Father, can you buy me an ugly duckling? Okay, let's go to the square tomorrow morning and see if anyone is selling an ugly duckling. Meg rubbed Amy's hair with a smile. This little girl is really obsessed with eating roast goose. I can only take her to try my luck tomorrow. After a day of business, Meg didn't feel too tired. First, the system had taken care of the ingredients and the preliminary processing. Even the washing of the dishes was done by the dishwasher. Second, eating 3 plates of Yeongju fried rice in a day was very effective in relieving the fatigue in his body. He even felt more energetic. Seeing that Amy was a little sleepy, Meg asked her to recite the multiplication table she had learned at noon again. She could recite all the numbers before 36, but 36 was indeed a hurdle. After thinking for a while, she gave up with a disappointed expression. It's okay, Meg is already very good. Everything you learned today has been used to collect money. Tomorrow, we'll start from 36. It won't be a problem, Meg encouraged with a smile. Okay, I'll work hard. Amy nodded. Taking advantage of this time, Meg also made a business schedule. Although opening the restaurant was his main business now, he couldn't open the restaurant all day long. If he set the business hours, he wouldn't have to stay in the restaurant all day long, and the customers would know when to eat, so they wouldn't have to wait all the time. It was convenient. 7:30 in the morning, 9 o'clock in the morning, 11:30 in the afternoon, 1:30 in the afternoon, and 5 o'clock in the evening, 9 o'clock in the evening, both for dinner and supper. He could arrange the rest of the time freely, and then take a day off every 6 days. Perfect. Meg looked at the schedule on the paper in front of him, then said in his mind, System, can you help me put this meal schedule on the sign at the door? Host, the system recommends that the host extend the meal time so that more food can be sold, the system replied. Being a restaurant owner is a job, but it's not everything. I can enjoy my job, but I want to enjoy my life more, Meg replied calmly, then said impatiently, Are you adding it or not? If not, I'll write it myself and put it on the sign. The system was silent for a while, then replied, Added. Let's go upstairs and sleep. Meg put the gold coins back into the money cabinet. Anyway, the system would automatically deduct the gold coins and change for the ingredients when he was cooking, so he didn't have to think too much about it. After teaching Amy the correct way to brush her teeth and wash her face, familiarizing her with the various things in the bathroom, and washing up himself, Meg carried Amy to the small bed. The little girl was already sleepy, and as soon as she lay on the soft bed, her eyelids began to droop. "Go to sleep." Meg smiled and stroked Amy's hair. "Father promised to buy Meg an ugly duckling," Amy said seriously as she reached out and grabbed Meg's finger. "Okay, we'll go buy it tomorrow." Meg nodded. Chapter 29. The next morning, Meg woke up at 6:30 a.m. In this world where there were no games or movies to pass the time, the night seemed very long, but the quality of his sleep was much better. "Right, system, do you sell TVs? Computers? Cell phones? PS4? Do you have Wi-Fi?" Meg suddenly thought of the system while brushing his teeth and couldn't help but ask in his mind. "Host, please have some self-respect. The system does not provide any non-kitchen appliances, nor does it provide free Wi-Fi." The system's serious voice sounded. "Don't worry, I don't have the money to buy it now." Meg calmly spat out the foam in his mouth. From the system's attitude, he could probably buy it if he had the money, but he really didn't have the spare money to sell these leisure items. Besides, if the Wi-Fi was not free, he could pay for it. After washing up, Meg put the little dress that he had washed and dried for Amy yesterday on the side of the bed. It was not good to go out in pajamas. Meg went downstairs and opened the door to take a look. The front and back of the sign indeed had the opening hours written on it, and it was also very smart to set up a countdown display that would jump up and down. Now it showed 6, which was very user-friendly. The time in this world was also 24 hours, and the concept of time was similar to that on Earth. With the efforts of the dwarven craftsmen, clockwork watches had become popular. The more advanced crystal watches, which were powered by crystals, were only popular among the aristocrats and the rich because of their high price. At least they didn't have to worry about not knowing the time. Mag jogged on the square in front of the restaurant for a while because it wasn't time for the restaurant to open yet. However, his current physical condition was too weak, and he felt out of breath after running for a while. He only managed to jog for about 20 minutes. "Mr. Mac, what are you doing so early in the morning?" Morby just opened the door and asked curiously when he saw Meg panting. "Exercising." "Mr. Mo, you opened so early?" Meg replied with a smile. The weapons shop in Morby was only about a meter away from the restaurant. In the past, the sound of hammering could be heard every day. Now, after the renovation of the house, the sound insulation was excellent. Not a single sound could be heard. "Yeah, I'm going to Mr. Mac's place to eat 2 bowls of Yangju fried rice before I start work." Morby nodded. After eating 2 meals yesterday, he had completely fallen in love with Shangzhou fried rice. Moreover, Morby felt comfortable all over when he woke up this morning. He didn't feel tired at all. Even his waist, which used to hurt every day when he woke up, didn't hurt anymore. The restaurant opens at 7:30 in the morning. The specific opening hours are written on the sign on the door. There's still a while before it opens. "I'll go clean up and prepare the ingredients," Meg replied with a smile. "I see. All right, I'll wait a little longer." Morby was stunned for a moment. Generally, other people's restaurants would open whenever there were customers. He didn't expect Meg to directly set the opening hours. However, on second thought, since Meg could make such delicious and magical Yangju fried rice, it was normal for him to have some rules and temper. When Meg returned to the restaurant, he went upstairs to wash his face. Amy had just woken up and changed her clothes. She squinted her eyes and opened her little hands as she walked over. She looked up at Meg and said coquettishly, "Father, hug me." The little girl had just woken up, and another strand of hair stood up on her head. The way she squinted her eyes and opened her little hands was so cute that Meg couldn't help but bend down and pick her up. He said softly, "Let's hug for a while. Then Amy can brush her teeth and wash her face. The restaurant is about to open for business." "Okay." Amy nodded and hugged Meg's neck for a while. Then she took the initiative to get down. She stood on her tiptoes and took the toothpaste and toothbrush. She looked back at Meg and said, "I can do it myself." Father, you can go do your work. Okay. Meg nodded with a smile and pretended to go out. However, he couldn't help but peek at the door for a while. The little girl seemed to be brushing her teeth well. Only then did he feel relieved and go downstairs. It was 7:30. Meg walked over and opened the door. Morbai was at the door looking at the opening hours on the small sign. We can open for business now. Please come in, Meg said politely with a smile. Okay, it's still 2 plates of Yeongju fried rice. I can't wait. Morbai laughed and walked into the restaurant. Grandpa Morbai the dwarf, good morning. As soon as Morbai sat down, Amy came downstairs and greeted him. Then she looked at Meg and touched her hair. She said, Father, should I tie my hair up? It seems a little too long. Tie your hair. Meg looked at the purple strip of cloth in Amy's hand and felt a little embarrassed. He really hadn't done this kind of thing before. He had to slowly study it. He could only say, Amy, please sit for a while. I'll tie your hair after I finish cooking the fried rice for Grandpa Morbai, okay? Okay. Amy nodded, put away the hair tie, and sat down obediently. Meg quickly made a plate of Yeongju fried rice for Morbai, and then he continued to make a second plate. When Meg finished making Amy's plate of Yeongju fried rice and brought it out, Morbai had just finished eating. Amy stood beside Morbai, stretched out her hand, and said seriously, 2 plates of fried rice, 12 gold coins in total. Pay up 12 gold coins. Little boss, count it. Morbai put the gold coins in Amy's hand with a smile. He was already used to the little girl pretending to be a little adult when collecting money. He stood up and looked at Meg with a smile. Mr. Mac, today's Yeongju fried rice is also very delicious, but the restaurant just opened, and there aren't many people here. I'm afraid business isn't very good, right? Yes, there are a little few customers. Meg nodded. This was also what he was most helpless about. Even good wine was afraid of being in deep alleys. Then I'll be off. Maybe I can bring you 2 customers at noon, the kind that won't think it's expensive. Morbai smiled and looked at Amy, who was seriously counting the gold coins. Thank you. Meg smiled. This was a way to quickly increase the number of customers by word of mouth. You're welcome. Morbai waved his hand in a rather forthright manner and turned to leave. Letting Amy eat first, Meg also made a plate for himself. After eating a plate of Yeongju fried rice, besides the delicious taste, the hunger and fatigue after the morning run were all gone. He felt very refreshed and energetic. Seeing that there were no customers coming for a while, Meg looked at Amy, who was holding a hairband full of expectation. He didn't want to delay any longer, so he took the hairband from her and said a little nervously, Amy, I don't know how to tie hair. Father, I believe you can do it. Amy looked back at him encouragingly. He didn't know where she found a small mirror, but she was looking at herself expectantly. In the past, Teacher Luna would help her tie her hair, but her father had never tied it. Then I'm really coming? Meg was still a little nervous. He tidied Amy's soft hair and tried hard to recall the hairstyles of girls. The simplest would be a single ponytail, or a cute bun, or a small braid. Chapter 30. As it turned out, tying up a little girl's hair required a lot of skill. Meg looked at her hair, which had become even messier, and awkwardly withdrew his hand. Actually, I think Amy's hair looks pretty even if it's draped over her shoulders, he said. But Ms. Luna knows how to do super cute pigtails. Amy looked up at Meg and blinked her big eyes pitifully. Ahem, let's get ready to go out and see if we can buy an ugly duckling. Meg cleared his throat and skipped the topic of tying up hair. Okay, I want to buy an ugly duckling. Amy immediately stopped caring about her hair and urged Meg to set off. Meg combed Amy's hair with a comb, but 2 strands of her ahoj still stood up, so he pretended not to notice. Since the opening hours were not over yet, he asked Amy to wait patiently for a while she memorized more than 10 terms on the multiplication table. We might not be able to buy an ugly duckling when we go out. If we can't find one, we'll buy it next time, okay? Meg said to Amy as he locked the door. He wanted to give her a heads up first. Yes, I know. Amy nodded obediently, her little face full of joy. First, she was going to buy an ugly duckling, and second, her father hadn't taken her out for a long time. Moreover, she could hold his big, warm hand. Let's go. Meg took Amy's soft hand. Looking at the smile on Amy's face, his mood became even better. System, do you sell experience bags for tying hair? Like the experience bags for Yeongju fried rice? Meg couldn't help but ask in his mind. Amy's resentful expression just now really made his heart ache. He had to be both a father and a mother now, so he really needed the skill of tying hair. Host, I'm warning you again, please don't insult the system with this kind of question. The system doesn't sell experience bags that have nothing to do with recipes. The system seemed a little angry. How about 10 gold coins? The system was silent. No. What about 30? The system remained silent. 100, that's all I can offer. Think about it yourself. Meg calmly quoted the price in his mind. The system was silent for a long time, then a line of words silently floated over. Fancy hair buns experience bag, 120 gold coins per set. Sorry, I don't want it now. I don't have money. Meg looked at the experience bag and said regretfully. But since the system was selling it, it was only a matter of time before he made the money. When the time came, he would definitely get a hairstyle that would make Amy's eyes light up. Thinking of this, his mood became even better. A string of ellipses floated across the system. Of course, Meg did not care about the system's feelings at all. After all, this fellow only cared about money. The Aiden Square was the center of Chaos City, and it was also the commercial hub. The crescent-shaped houses were curved in an arc, and it was about 2 to 3 kilometers from the restaurant to the other end. There were all kinds of strange shops along the way. As such, there was a saying in Chaos City that as long as you had the money, you could buy anything on the continent in the Aiden Square. Of course, this saying was a bit exaggerated, but it was clear that the Aiden Square was very prosperous. Father, that blackbird is terrible. Not long after they walked out, Amy hid beside Meg and pointed at the 2 bird cages hanging in the magic potion shop next to them. Meg looked over with a little surprise. This magic potion shop was only 5 or 6 shops away from the restaurant. In his memory, the owner was an old human magic caster. He was tall and thin, and a little hunchback. He did not usually interact with others, and only liked to tease his 2 birds and teach them to say some strange things. There were 2 bird cages. A black crow and a parrot with green feathers and a red beak were jumping up and down in their cages. When they noticed Mag and Amy, they both craned their necks to look at them. The black crow raised its head proudly and looked at Amy disdainfully, and said in a low voice, "Wow. Ugly little thing, you passed by my noble palace again. Now, I allow you to kneel on the ground and kowtow to me 3 times. Let me bless you to look more like an elf in the future. You're the ugly one. You're black from head to toe." Amy clenched her little fists angrily. Then she looked up at Meg and said in a wronged and unconfident voice, "Father, is Meg really ugly?" "Of course not. Amy is very beautiful. Didn't Big Sister Elf say so yesterday?" Meg smiled and shook his head. He pointed at the crow and said, "You see, this stupid bird is really ugly." Meg had a smile on his face, but there was a murderous look in his eyes. This damn crow actually dared to say such things to Amy. Wasn't it messing up his plan to boost Amy's self-confidence? And it looked like this wasn't the first time it had mocked Amy. "That's right. So ugly, so ugly. And you still call yourself king all day long. Hearing you make me so annoyed." The green parrot on the side nodded in agreement. Its voice sounded like that of a young girl, and its tone was full of helplessness. "Human, take away your lowly finger. Don't think that I'll be afraid of you just because you've turned from a cripple to a semi-cripple." The crow turned to look at Meg and said, "Amy, do you still remember the fireball technique from yesterday?" Meg looked at Amy and said with a smile, "Yes, yes." Amy nodded and looked at Meg with some confusion. For those fellows who like to play dirty with their mouths, the easiest way is to make them shut up. "Try using a fireball technique on them," Meg said with a smile. The crow became even more arrogant and said indifferently, "H, do you think I'll be afraid?" This birdcage was enchanted by the old man, and I can even recite the incantation for the fireball technique backwards." But before it could finish speaking, a bluish-purple fireball appeared in Amy's hand. Instant cast! The crow was stunned. Then the fireball was thrown over by Amy, and it instantly enveloped the birdcage. "I'm the one. Ah! Help!" The magic shield outside the birdcage melted in an instant. After the thin film disappeared, the steel bars on the birdcage also began to melt. The bluish-purple flames immediately engulfed the black crow, and only a series of screams could be heard. Meg was a little surprised. He didn't expect Amy's first fireball technique to be so good, and it was even more powerful than he had imagined. Of course, this was a good thing. He smiled and continued to walk forward while holding Amy's hand, and said, "Remember, if you meet such fellows in the future, just throw a fireball at them." Yes, Amy will remember." Amy nodded vigorously, and happily grabbed one of Meg's fingers and swung it. She felt that she had vented all the anger she had suffered from that crow. Sure enough, she didn't have to worry about being bullied when she went out with her father. "Fire! Put out the fire!" The green-feathered parrot called out in a panic. A skinny old man hurried out of the shop and saw the birdcage on fire. His face was shocked, and he quickly chanted an incantation to throw a water ball at it. Chapter 31. Shut up, Charcoal. Julian, who was wearing a black magician's robe, muttered in a sharp voice. His expression was solemn as he watched the father and daughter walk away hand in hand. He muttered, "What a strong magical wave. Is this little girl a genius? Or is that man a hidden master? Now he's really charcoal." The green-capped parrot looked at Black Crow, whose feathers were all burnt, and giggled, gloating over his misfortune. "Old man, please call me your Highness Foma Odin Ben. This king's palace was destroyed by that little fellow. Hurry up and make me a new one. Also, it's best if you make me a gorgeous robe, so that this king's beautiful body won't be seen by others." He sniffed left and right and cried, "What the hell? Where did the smell of roast chicken come from? If you talk nonsense again, I'll feed you a new test product." Julian turned his head and looked at Black Crow. His face was expressionless, but his voice was as sharp as a demon crawling out of hell. Black Crow immediately cowered. He lifted his leg and moved to the side. He said shyly, Then at least give me 2 leaves. Otherwise, I'll be an eyesore standing here. Green Bean, go and find him 2 leaves. Julian said and turned to walk into the shop. As he walked, he said to himself, "Strange, why didn't I notice the magical wave over there before? Perhaps I can exchange some pointers with him. Mr. Julian, the next time you need my help, please call me Sunny," the green-capped parrot said cheerfully. Said the green-feathered parrot cheerfully. It tilted its head and opened the lock on the birdcage. It fluttered and flew out. After a while, it came back with 2 leaves in its mouth and put them beside Charcoal. It then flew back into the birdcage, locked the door, and combed its feathers gracefully. "I didn't expect that I'd be reduced to such a state." Charcoal sighed and looked around. He lowered his head and picked up the 2 leaves with his mouth and wrapped them around his body to protect his important parts. Meg held the hand of a happy Amy as they walked towards the square. After setting the Black Crow on fire, Amy was clearly in a good mood. She skipped and skipped ahead, stopping from time to wait for Meg before continuing on. Meg had 10 gold coins in his pocket. Although gold coins were very important to him now, if there was anything that Amy liked or wanted, he would not hesitate to give it to her. However, the little guy was very sensible and didn't spend money recklessly. After wandering around for half an hour, he only asked for a small puppet that could pull strings and move. After that, Meg took Amy to the largest market in the Aden Square. Unfortunately, they didn't even find a swan, let alone an ugly duckling. He did have some ducklings, but Meg was worried that Amy would think that he was lying to her if the ducklings did not turn into swans when they grew up, so he did not buy any for her. The normal food in the market was very cheap, but the system said that he couldn't bring in ingredients bought from outside, so he gave up on the idea of buying any. "Father, we won't be able to buy an ugly duckling today, right?" Amy looked up at Meg with a disappointed expression at the entrance of the market. "The boss said that the ugly duckling hasn't been born yet, so we might not be able to buy it until a little later. Meg nodded. He was thinking about how to comfort the expectant Amy. It was already early autumn, and even swans were rare in the vicinity of Chaos City, let alone little swans. They probably wouldn't be able to find any for a long time. Before Meg could comfort her, Amy's gaze had already been attracted by a herb stall on the side of the road. She skipped over and squatted down. She looked at it with wide eyes for a while, then turned around and waved at Meg. "Father, come and see. These must be the ugly duckling's eggs." Meg walked over. A dark-skinned, muscular middle-aged man was sitting next to the stall, weaving a small basket with hay. He seemed to be a herb gatherer. His hands were covered with calluses from climbing ropes. There were bags of herbs on the ground, and there was a small pile of hay at his feet. On top of it was a large grey egg about the size of a bowl. Amy pointed at the egg on the ground, and looked up at Meg expectantly. "Father, let's buy this egg. You said that there isn't an ugly duckling now, so we can go home and hatch it." "Sure." Meg nodded with a smile. Amy had been disappointed many times today, and he wanted her to go home happily. He turned to the herb gatherer and asked, "Boss, what kind of egg is this?" "Well, I'm not too sure. I found it on a cliff when I went to pick herbs yesterday. Only birds can go up there, so it's probably a bird's egg. It's very nutritious," the herb gatherer said with a silly smile. "How much is it?" Meg's eyes lit up. If it was a bird's egg, then it would be about the same size as a swan. And judging by the size of the egg, it would probably grow bigger than an ostrich. If it was tamed well, it could be Amy's mount. The herb gatherer looked at Amy, who was full of anticipation, and scratched his head with a smile. "If the little girl likes it, then 3 gold coins. "Okay, 3 gold coins. Keep it well." Meg took out 3 gold coins and handed it to the herb gatherer. Herb gatherers walked on cliffs every day, risking their lives in exchange for money. And if this was really a big bird's egg, 3 gold coins really wasn't expensive at all. "Okay, I'll give this little basket to the little girl. It's just right for this egg." The herb gatherer put the egg and the hay into the little basket he just made, and handed it to Amy with a smile. "Amy, quickly thank Uncle," Meg hurriedly said to her. "Thank you, Uncle." Amy happily took the little basket and held it with both hands as she whispered, "Ugly duckling, be good. Wait for me to hatch you slowly." "You're welcome, you're welcome." The herb gatherer smiled and waved his hand. He looked at Meg and said, "My daughter is the same age as her, and she also likes to raise little things. But she already has 2 monkeys at home, so I won't let her bring them back. Yeah, the little one has been talking about it for the past 2 days. I hope she'll like it when it hatches." Meg also smiled helplessly, but his eyes were full of love as he looked at Amy. After bidding farewell to the herb gatherer, Meg originally wanted to help Amy carry the egg, but she refused. She was struggling to carry it with both hands, and Meg, who was walking behind her, was a little worried that the egg might fall to the ground. The walk back took about half an hour. Amy gently placed the little basket on the stairs at the door and heaved a sigh of relief. She turned to look at Meg with a serious expression and said, "Father, thank you for buying the ugly duckling's egg for Amy. I'll take good care of it in the future." Meg took out a handkerchief and wiped the sweat on her forehead as he said with a smile, "Okay, but Uncle Herb Gatherer just said that this might not be the ugly duckling's egg. It could be the egg of another bird." Amy shook her head firmly. "No, I'm sure this is the ugly duckling's egg. I'm going to hatch it, and then slowly raise it until it becomes a white swan, and then. Chapter 32. Meg observed 3 minutes of silence for the unhatched egg. At the same time, he felt a little helpless about Amy's deep obsession with the roast goose. It seemed that he had to work hard to complete the mission and exchange for the roast goose recipe as soon as possible. Of course, it would also be good if he could exchange for the Peking duck recipe. After opening the door and entering the restaurant, Amy carried the small basket and put it in the cabinet under the counter. She squatted down and whispered something to the egg for a while before carefully closing the door, as if she was worried that she would wake the little guy inside the egg. "Father, how long will it take for the ugly duckling to hatch?" Amy asked Meg expectantly. I'm not too sure about that. Maybe it'll have to wait until next spring. Meg shook his head. He didn't know much about the incubation cycle of birds. If it's spring, then it'll take a long time. Amy thought for a while and felt a little depressed. Meg thought for a while and quickly said, if it's warmer, maybe it'll hatch sooner, just like how a mother duck incubates her eggs. Amy's eyes lit up immediately. Then can Amy lie on the egg too? Meg couldn't help but smile. He shook his head and said, that won't do. Amy, go get the small blanket in the room and cover it with it. That should do it. Okay, Amy answered happily and quickly ran upstairs. I hope it's really a swan egg, although the chances are slim, Meg muttered to himself and went into the kitchen to pour 2 glasses of water. After helping Amy wrap the egg with the small blanket, Meg looked at the time. It was time for the restaurant to open again. He glanced at Amy, who was squatting on the ground and whispering, ugly duckling, come on, grow up quickly, and wondered if he should go to the roast goose restaurant later to buy a roast goose for Amy to satisfy her craving. After waiting for a few minutes, it was exactly 11:30. Meg walked to the door and flipped the sign, officially opening the restaurant for lunch. Although not many people passed by the entrance of the restaurant, the luxurious and unique style of the restaurant still attracted a lot of curiosity. 2 dwarfs and an orc came one after another, but after seeing the menu, they shook their heads and left. Meg was completely calm now. It was normal. Not everyone liked to eat Yangju fried rice, and they didn't even know what it was. Rather than spending 6 gold coins on an unknown dish, they might as well eat a large portion of roast meat and a jug of strong liquor. Probably only Morbai and his friends will be there for lunch. Meg thought to himself, feeling a little helpless. It was already the 2nd day of business, and he had only sold 8 servings of Yangju fried rice. If he wanted to complete the mission given by the system, he would have to sell at least 500 servings of Yangju fried rice in the next 9 days. The situation was not optimistic. Right at this moment, the sound of a horse's hooves could be heard from outside. Mag looked out, and almost burst out laughing. It wasn't a horse, but a black donkey. There was a human knight in silver-grey soft armor sitting on the donkey's back. He was very tall, and his feet were almost touching the ground when he sat on the horse's back. The knight looked to be about 30 years old. He had a square face, and his black hair was casually tied up with a grey strip of cloth. He held the reins of the donkey with one hand and the long sword at his waist with the other. He stopped in front of the restaurant and looked up at the restaurant's sign with a smile. Mammis? That's a nice name. I'll eat here for lunch. Conti Nicholas smiled and said to himself. He jumped off the donkey, led it to a tree beside the square, and tied it up. He strode into the restaurant and pushed the door open. Hello, welcome. Meg, who was standing beside the counter, looked at the long sword inlaid with an emerald in the hand of the donkey rider and smiled. Hello, I want to eat. What good food do you have here? Conti also looked at Meg with a smile. He did not look around like other customers when they came in. There's a menu on the table. You can take a look first. Meg pointed at the black menu on the side. This night gave him a feeling of enthusiasm, as if there was nothing for him to worry about. Okay. Conti sat down and opened the menu with a smile. When he saw that there was only one dish, he was stunned for a moment. But soon, he recovered his bright smile. He looked up at Meg and said, Boss, then I'll have this Yangju fried rice. Okay, please wait a moment. Meg looked at Conti, who kept smiling, and was a little surprised. After all, this was the first customer who directly ordered after looking at the menu, as if he didn't even need to think. But his expression was still calm. This kind of customer was of course his favorite. As for whether he would regret it after eating, he was not worried at all. He nodded with a smile and turned to enter the kitchen. The environment is not bad. Conti put the long sword in his hand on the table and looked around the restaurant. He seemed to be in a good mood. Hello, new customer. At this time, Amy, who had been squatting behind the counter, suddenly poked her head out from behind the counter and looked at Conti. Whoosh. Conti was so shocked that he jumped onto the chair. The long sword in his hand was already half out of its sheath. His expression was serious and nervous. Are you a knight? Amy was also shocked by Conti's reaction. But when she saw the shiny soft armor and long sword on his body, she walked out from behind the counter and looked at him curiously. When Conti saw that it was a cute little girl who looked to be only 3 or 4 years old, he quickly put away his sword awkwardly. But after jumping off the chair, he proudly raised his chin and said, "No, I'm a dragon slayer. Although I haven't seen a dragon yet, I believe that sooner or later, I will cut down those evil dragons with my sword." Meg heard the noise and looked back. When he heard this, he couldn't help but laugh. In the memory of his predecessor, there were many young knights like him who had the same goal of slaying dragons. Of course, he was also one of them. But the difference between him and the others was that he had indeed slain evil dragons with his sword, and more than one at that. Wow, that's amazing. Amy clapped her little hands and looked at Conti with some admiration. She pointed at the long sword in his hand and said, "Then you must have defeated many powerful opponents, right? I don't like to duel with others. My idol is Meg Alex. He once slew 4 evil dragons and is one of the bravest and strongest knights on the continent," Conti said with a smile, his eyes full of fanaticism and worship. He then looked down at Amy and said, "Little girl, if you like knights, you should like a knight like Meg Alex." Chapter 33. Conti paused and followed Amy's gaze to the kitchen. The skinny owner was cooking seriously. He shook his head with a smile and said, "No, although their names may be the same, Meg Alex is a powerful and proud knight. He would never cook in the kitchen, and he doesn't have a daughter." Meg shrugged in the kitchen. Conti was right. If he hadn't experienced that incident, his predecessor would have been a powerful and proud knight. How could someone who didn't even enter the kitchen know how to cook? But why did he feel a little secretly happy when he heard Conti say those words with such admiration? "My father's rainbow fried rice is super delicious. Anyway, in my heart, my father is the best. I don't care." Amy looked up at Conti and said seriously, "Well, I also believe that the food made by this owner will be delicious." Conti sat down again and said with a smile. He didn't argue with Amy. "Yes, that's right." Remi smiled again. The bell at the door rang again. Morbai pushed the door open and came in, followed by 2 2-meter-tall orcs, each carrying a mace as thick as an ordinary person's thigh. "Mr. Mo, when did such a beautiful restaurant open next door? What's good?" Harbeng, who had a ring of animal teeth around his neck, asked in a loud voice. Even Meg in the kitchen heard him. "It just opened a few days ago. Of course, there's good food, so I brought you here to try it. But let me say this first, I'm not treating." Morbai smiled mysteriously and greeted Meg, who had turned his head in the kitchen. "Mr. Mac, I'm here again. You are much more picky about food than us 2 brothers. If you say it's good, it must be good. As long as we can eat meat and drink wine, it's fine." Harbeng nodded and didn't think much of it. Haga, on the other hand, looked around curiously with a simple and honest smile on his face. When Morbai and Harbeng said "ha," he just laughed and didn't say anything. "Welcome." Meg had just finished processing the ingredients, and the rice in the rice cooker was not ready yet. He walked to the door and said with a smile, "Please take a seat. There is a menu on the table." Mag sized up the 2 orcs without batting an eyelid. They were wearing beastskin aprons and beastskin shirts, revealing the long black hair on their chests. They were taller than normal humans by more than a head. Their skin was slightly dark brown, and they had fangs that were about 3 centimeters long in their mouths. Mag immediately thought of the orcs in Magic Beasts. Moreover, these 2 orcs should be brothers as they looked very similar. However, the one on the left with the pressure necklace seemed to have a bad temper, while the one on the right had a silly smile on his face. Although he was an orc, he looked quite amiable. "I don't need to. I have a lot of work today. 3 servings of Yangju fried rice," Morbai said straightforwardly. He sat down at the table he had been sitting at for the past 2 days and looked at Amy with a smile. "Good afternoon, young lady." "Hello, Grandpa Morbai the dwarf." Amy nodded. Then she pointed to Conti and introduced, "He is a new friend, a dragon-slaying warrior." "Dragon-slaying warrior?" Morbai looked at the young knight in surprise. "Ha, what dragon-slaying warrior? I'm afraid he can't even beat a goblin." Harbeng pulled out the chair opposite Morbai and sat down. He looked at Conti with a mocking smile. Although this human was wearing a suit of armor, there were few calluses on his hand that held the sword. His face was pale, and he was just a rich human. I have the ambition to become a dragon-slaying warrior. I have never fought a goblin before, so there is no such thing as being unable to beat a goblin, as you said. Conti looked at Harbeng with a smile on his face, as if he did not take Harbeng's words to heart. So, you think you can beat me? Harbeng stood up, his muscles bulging. He held a thick mace in one hand and stared at Conti with his big eyes. We have never fought before, so I don't think I can't beat you. However, I will not fight with you. My target is only the giant dragon. Conti smiled and shook his head. His gaze swept past Harbeng's head and fell on the wallpaper behind him. There was a giant dragon spewing flames. That is my opponent. You hypocritical knight, I think you want to fight with me today, don't you? Harbeng rested his mace on his shoulder and shouted while pointing at Conti. Meg looked at the two who were at daggers drawn. He took 2 steps forward and said coldly, "My 2 guests, this is a restaurant, not a gladiator arena. If there is any conflict that needs to be resolved, please do it outside the restaurant." Mag cursed in his heart. A world without laws was indeed more chaotic than he had imagined. They had to fight on the spot just because of a disagreement. What if the restaurant was wrecked? Shut up. Harbeng turned around and shouted at Meg. In his eyes, this human must be on the same side as the knight in front of him. Harbeng. Morbai looked a little unhappy. He originally wanted to bring 2 guests to Meg and make Amy happy. He did not expect to have a conflict as soon as he sat down. He felt embarrassed and wanted to ask this reckless guy to sit down. Hagar, who was standing next to him, was also a little anxious. He tugged at Harbeng's clothes and wanted to say something, but stopped. Meg narrowed his eyes slightly, but before he could speak. "Don't yell at my father." Amy, who was watching the conflict between the 2 sides, was still in a daze. Suddenly, she stood in front of Meg and protected him behind her. She stretched out her hand, and a ball of bluish-purple flame rose from her hand. The flame rose more than half a meter high, and a white hole was burned in the air. "It's so hot." Harbeng, who was standing next to them, changed his expression and jumped back 2 steps. He looked at the animal skin on his left sleeve, which had been burned by the high temperature, and then looked at the blue-purple flame rising from Amy's hand. He could not help but swallow. What a terrible flame. The temperature was so high even though it was in the air. If it fell on him, he would probably be burned to a crisp. This little girl looked so small, but he didn't expect her to be a magician with such terrifying strength. The speed at which she released flames was even faster than those old magicians, and the scorching temperature was even more terrifying than the human magicians he had seen before. Seeing Harbeng yell at Meg, Conti, who was holding the long sword on the table, also looked at Amy in surprise. His eyes lingered on the flame in her hand for a while, and then he put down the sword again. It seemed that he did not need to do anything today. Magic. Morbai was also stunned. He did not expect Amy to know magic, and it was so powerful that even Harbeng was a little afraid. Chapter 34. Meg wanted to say something to defend his dignity as the restaurant's owner, but he suddenly realized that he didn't need to say anything. Everyone's expression had said it all. They were more afraid of the fireball in Amy's hand than he had imagined. They were even afraid. But when Remi stood in front of him to protect him and said those words, it made his heart feel warm. What a considerate little girl. "Harbeng, if you still treat me as a friend, please sit down. Don't make trouble in Mr. Mac's restaurant," Morbai said to Harbeng seriously. If he couldn't eat Youngju fried rice in the future because of this reckless guy, the loss would outweigh the gain. Hua Xiaoheng nodded his head and said to Harbeng in a serious tone, "Guru, Guru." Hagar pulled Harbeng's clothes and said something in the Orc language. It seemed that he was trying to persuade him not to make trouble. Harbeng looked at Meg, and then at the fireball in Amy's hand. He was a little embarrassed. The fireball in Amy's hand did make him a little afraid. Of course, he was more afraid of Meg behind Amy. Even this little half-elf girl could use such a powerful fireball. Meg's strength must be even more terrifying. However, if he was scared by a little girl and shrank back to his seat, he would be laughed at by the other tribes. Therefore, he could neither stand nor sit. He was in an extremely awkward situation. Meg looked at Harbeng's expression and wanted to laugh. He didn't expect to be regarded as a master. On second thought, he felt that this was not a bad idea. He could intimidate a customer like this irascible orc and effectively maintain order in the restaurant. His expression became even calmer. He patted Amy's head and smiled. "Amy, the customer has no ill intentions. Put away the fire." "Okay." Amy clenched her little fist and extinguished the fireball in her hand. But she still stared at Harbeng with hostility. Harbeng heaved a sigh of relief. He glanced at Meg and felt that this human was not only unfathomable, but also smart. How could a restaurant make money by attacking customers? With his status, many people in Chaos City would give him face. He was about to say something to get back his dignity. But before Harbeng could say anything, Meg looked at him and said, "Sir, this restaurant forbids making noise so as not to disturb other customers. At the same time, no provocation or fighting is allowed. Otherwise, you will be blacklisted and never be served again." "What?" Harbeng's eyes widened. It was the first time he had heard someone tell him not to make a noise in a restaurant. Was he deliberately making things difficult for him? His temper flared up and he was about to explode on the spot. Father said, "Making a noise in the restaurant. You're not allowed to shout like this. If you don't listen, I'll burn you." Amy looked at Harbeng with a serious expression. She reached out her little hand as if she was going to release another fireball. Harbeng subconsciously wanted to move away, but his dignity as an orc warrior made him unable to move. A ball of anger rose in his heart, but he couldn't get angry at a little girl. And the little girl's fireball was so scary. Although he was angry, he had no other choice but to hold it in. "Guru Guru." Haga pulled Harbeng's arm and said something in the orc language. Then, he pulled him back to his seat. He turned to Meg and smiled apologetically. He said in the common language, "Sorry, my brother has a bad temper. It's okay. There's a menu on the table. Please take a look before you order. Let me know when you've made your choice." Meg nodded with a smile. This orc looked quite honest, and he wasn't angry. If an orc didn't have a temper, would he still be an orc? But in his restaurant, he had to follow his rules. Meg nodded to Morbai and Conti, then turned and went into the kitchen to make fried rice for Conti. "You'll see how good father is later." Amy glared at Harbeng. She felt a little bored, so she went back to the counter to look at the egg. "Mr. Morbai, what is this restaurant selling? How dare they ask so much of their customers?" Harbeng looked at Morbai angrily, but he still lowered his voice. "See for yourself." Seeing that Meg wasn't angry, Morbai's mood improved a lot. He smiled and pushed the menu in front of Harbeng. These two could be considered his regular customers. As the sons of the chief of one of the few tribes that guarded a gold mine, many of the weapons of their tribe's warriors were made by him. 1,000 gold coins for a single weapon was a huge sum of money. Furthermore, because they often came to Chaos City to purchase all kinds of things, they could be considered old acquaintances, and would often go out to eat together. These two people's love for food was not inferior to his at all, and their appetites were far greater than his. "Stop keeping me guessing. Let me see." Harbeng took the menu and opened it. He thought he had read it wrong, so he turned to the cover and looked at it for a while. Then he turned it back and pointed at the small line in the upper left corner. He looked at Morbai with a ridiculous face, and said, "Mr. Morbai, are you kidding me? There's only one dish on the menu. Don't tell me this restaurant only sells one dish. What the hell is Yangju fried rice? It's 600 copper coins for one dish. Of course it's good." Morbai looked at the two and said with a smile, "Don't blame me for not reminding you. This is the best thing I've ever eaten in my life." First, he was ignored by an idiot knight. Then, he was frightened by a little girl. Then, he was warned by a human chef not to speak loudly. Harbeng was already in a bad mood. Now that he saw the menu, Harbeng felt that Morbai brought them to this restaurant on purpose to rip them off. He had made so many weapons for him all these years. He didn't expect him to be such a person. It seemed that he had to find a more honest blacksmith after all the weapons were handed over. 600 copper coins could buy a big plate of roast beef and a big jug of wine at Friar's Tavern. He shook his head and said, "This thing doesn't look like it has any meat. I don't want to eat it." "Mo. Boss, it's delicious." "I'll have one," Haga said to Meg in the kitchen in broken common language. "Okay, please wait a moment," Meg turned around and said. Harbeng's voice was much lower than before, but Meg still heard it. The corners of his mouth turned up. Morbai had said the same thing. Since he had sat down, there was nothing that a bowl of Yeongju fried rice couldn't solve. Chapter 35. Bro, let's go eat meat and drink later. Let's not eat here, Harbeng said to Haga in the Orc language. If Haga also ate, no one would drink with him. "Do you want one?" "I think it will be good," Haga said with a silly smile. "No, even if I starve to death, I will never eat anything in this restaurant." Harbeng shook his head. This time, he spoke in the common language, biting each word. With his hands folded in front of his chest, he was ready to laugh at them for ordering the food. Someone is going back on his word. No one knew when Amy had climbed onto the high stool behind the counter. She looked at Harbeng and said softly. Harbeng's face froze. He was a little nervous when he heard Amy's voice, and a little annoyed when he heard her words. He stressed again, "I swear on my mace that I will never eat it." Harbeng's emotions were written all over his face. Morbai naturally knew what he was thinking, but he didn't explain anything. For a delicacy like Yeongju fried rice, he just needed to enjoy it. There was no need to explain. Beside them, Conti was also looking at the kitchen expectantly. It seemed that the fast just now didn't affect his mood at all. The smile on his face never disappeared. "Please enjoy." Soon, Meg came out with a plate of Yeongju fried rice and put it in front of Conti. He put the spoon on the edge of the plate, and the rich aroma of the fried rice slowly spread out. This smell. Harbeng, who didn't plan to turn around, suddenly had his eyes lit up. The fragrance was like a kitten scratching his heart. After struggling for a while, he couldn't help but tilt his head slightly and peek at the colorful fried rice in front of Conti out of the corner of his eye. "It smells so good." Conti couldn't help but praise the fried rice in front of him. There was more surprise in his eyes. This was a cooking method he had never seen before. The egg was perfectly wrapped around the rice. 5 or 6 ingredients were cut into the size of rice grains by exquisite knife skills. The size of each grain seemed to have been measured with a ruler. There was almost no difference. With so many ingredients mixed together, it seemed to be fried with oil. The aroma was so rich. He hadn't eaten yet, but the rich aroma had already made him salivate. He picked up the spoon and scooped a spoonful into his mouth. The taste of various ingredients melted in his mouth, causing him to involuntarily close his eyes. The rice wrapped in the fragrant egg was so sweet and delicious after he bit into it. The prawns brought the unique freshness of the sea. The winter bamboo shoots and tree mushrooms were fresh and tender, and all of them melted in his mouth. After swallowing, there was still a rich aftertaste. This feeling was really too satisfying and enjoyable. Gulp. Harbeng gulped unconsciously. When he realized what he was doing, he quickly looked away. Seeing that no one was paying attention to him, he couldn't help but steal glances at Conti from the corner of his eyes. The corners of Meg's mouth curled up slightly. Harbeng's little movements didn't escape his eyes. Amy, who was resting her chin on her hands, also had a thoughtful expression on her face. Her eyes lit up as if she had seen through everything. "It's so delicious." Conti suddenly opened his eyes and gave Meg a thumbs up. Then he immediately lowered his head and stuffed the fried rice into his mouth, one mouthful after another. He didn't want to stop at all. He had made the right choice this afternoon. Blackie was quite reliable. What was more amazing was that after eating the Yeongju fried rice, there was a warm current in the body that was constantly relieving the fatigue of the body. It was like drinking a recovery potion, but more gentle. It was so comfortable that it felt like there were small hands massaging the body. Meg turned around and went into the kitchen to cook the fried rice for Morbai. It seemed that it would be a busy afternoon. Harbeng didn't know how many times he had swallowed his saliva. He had been stealing glances at Conti from the corner of his eyes, but now he had turned half of his body and was staring at the Yeongju fried rice in front of Conti. He was leaning forward slightly, as if he would jump out at any time. It didn't take long for Conti to finish the fried rice. Looking at the empty plate in front of him, he raised his head and said to Meg, who was in the kitchen, "It's so delicious. Boss, please give me another Yeongju fried rice." "Okay, please wait a moment," Meg answered, his hands and feet moving more quickly. "It looks delicious." Haga watched Conti finish the Yeongju fried rice, his face full of expectation. "Is it really that good?" Harbeng couldn't help but look at Conti and ask. "I've never eaten anything better than this. It would be a pity if I missed it." Conti nodded with a smile. He seemed to be in a better mood and didn't take the previous conflict to heart. Harbeng looked at the plate in front of Conti, which was cleaner than his face, and then looked at Conti's face. He suddenly felt that this guy's smile was quite sincere. Except for the fact that he was a bit arrogant, he wasn't that bad. Thinking about what he had just said, Harbeng suddenly regretted that he had been so decisive. If he went back on his words now, it would be too embarrassing. He would definitely be laughed at by the little girl. "Please enjoy." Meg came out with Morbai's fried rice and put it in front of him. The freshly cooked Yeongju fried rice was still steaming. Fresh green onions were sprinkled on it, making the colorful fried rice look more appetizing. The rich aroma of the fried rice assaulted Harbeng's nostrils. Seeing Meg beside him, Harbeng crossed his arms again and kept a straight face. However, he couldn't help but look at the Yeongju fried rice on the table, his nose sniffing exaggeratedly. "Okay." Morbai had already picked up the spoon and put a spoonful into his mouth, his face full of satisfaction. Although he had eaten more than 10 servings, looking at the fried rice in front of him, smelling the aroma and the intoxicating taste, he still felt that he wouldn't get tired of it even if he ate it every day. Glancing at Harbeng, whose mouth was still moving, Meg turned and went into the kitchen, guessing in his heart how many servings he could endure. Probably the next one. As soon as Meg left, Harbeng immediately put down his hands and put them on the table. Looking at Morbai, who was enjoying his meal, he asked in a low voice, "Boss Missouri, is it really that good? Do you think I would lie to you?" Morbai curled his lips and took another bite, feeling the fatigue of his muscles disappear in the warm current. It was so comfortable that he wanted to cry out. Looking at Morbai's face full of enjoyment, Harbeng couldn't help but ask, "Let me have a taste." "Absolutely not." Morbai directly took the plate away, afraid that it would be robbed. He pointed to the menu beside him and said, "You order it yourself." "Well." Harbeng looked at the menu on the table and couldn't help but sneak a glance at Amy behind the counter. He was a little hesitant. He had just made a solemn vow, and even used his mace to swear. If he ordered now, wouldn't he be slapping himself in the face? But this Yeongju fried rice smelled so good. Seeing that Conti and Morbai tasted better, he couldn't help but want to have one. Chapter 36. "Boss, give me a plate of Yeongju fried rice." Harbeng stood up abruptly and shouted toward the kitchen. But when he felt the unfriendly eyes on him, he immediately realized that he had done something wrong. He lowered his voice and repeated, "Boss, please give me a plate of Yeongju fried rice." "Okay, please wait a moment." Meg turned around and answered. He couldn't help but laugh when he turned around. Was it because of a plate of Yeongju fried rice that another orc who had lost his dream? "Since father isn't angry, I'll let it go this time." Behind the counter, Amy clenched her fist, and a small fireball slowly disappeared without anyone noticing. With the improvement of his proficiency in the past 2 days, Meg could make a plate of Yeongju fried rice faster and faster. He could make a plate of Yeongju fried rice in about 5 or 6 minutes while processing the ingredients. "Here's your Yeongju fried rice. Please enjoy." Meg put the plate in front of Haga. "Thank you," Haga said with a silly smile. He picked up the spoon and took a bite. His eyes suddenly lit up. The taste was so delicious that it was different from anything he had eaten before. The first thing he tasted was the egg wrapped in the rice. How on earth was it made? Even the best swan eggs found by the lakeside could not be made to be so fragrant and soft. What set off the egg's flavor was the rice wrapped in the egg. The sweet and fragrant rice and the egg were perfectly combined. The other ingredients were also very delicious. After biting into the ham that had been marinated for many years, the salty gravy flowed out. The prawns were wrapped in the freshness of the sea. The mushrooms, winter bamboo shoots, green beans, and chives, which were cut into the size of rice grains, brought rich sweetness. All the ingredients blended together perfectly and finally became a taste that lingered in his mouth for a long time after he swallowed. "Big brother, let me have a bite." Ha-Beng, who was swallowing his saliva, came over and looked at Haga expectantly. Haga was the easiest to talk to among his brothers. Usually, they would let him have all the good food. Now that he had a bite, there was no problem. No. But this time, just like Morbai, Haga took his plate and turned it to the other side. His spoon clinked against the plate as he shoveled spoonful after spoonful of food into his mouth. He simply couldn't stop. "Big brother, I'm your brother. Don't you usually give me food?" Ha-Beng didn't give up and went to the other side. Haga stopped eating and swallowed the fried rice in his mouth. He looked at Ha-Beng and said with a silly smile, "Because it doesn't taste good." Ha-Beng was petrified. He looked at Haga, who was still enjoying the fried rice with his head lowered. Sitting back in his seat, Ha-Beng still felt that something was wrong. Was this still his honest big brother? However, his mind soon returned to the Yangju fried rice. His Yangju fried rice was finally ready while he was anxiously waiting for it to be ready. "Here's your Yangju fried rice. Please enjoy." Meg put down the fried rice and took a step back. Amy stood beside Meg and looked at Ha-Beng, blinking her big eyes. At this moment, Ha-Beng's attention was completely attracted by the Yangju fried rice in front of him. It was a torment for him to watch the three people enjoying the delicious food in front of him. He picked up the spoon next to him and took a big bite from the middle. The aroma was even richer and more attractive than the barbecue. He opened his mouth and put it in, and his eyes widened. How could there be such delicious food? All kinds of flavors seemed to dance on the tip of his tongue, bringing him incomparable enjoyment. His body and soul seemed to be shouting, "Eat, eat, eat." He swallowed one mouthful after another, wishing he could swallow the whole plate. In a short while, the plate was empty. "Is it good?" Loud voice. Amy looked at Ha-Beng and asked. Ha-Beng held the plate in one hand and the spoon in the other. Although he felt that it was a little strange to suddenly have a nickname, he still nodded with a silly smile. "Haha, it's delicious. Next time, if you want to eat more, don't make so much noise, or I won't let you eat." Amy scolded him like a little adult, folding her hands in front of her chest. "No. I promise I won't." Ha-Beng nodded repeatedly. The imposing manner he had when he first came in was completely gone. Now, he only had the Yangju fried rice in his mind. One serving was not enough. If he was kicked out for talking loudly, he would regret it for the rest of his life. As for the 600 copper coins, face, and oath, were they important? No, in front of this Yangju fried rice, those things were not important at all. Of course, it was also because it was Amy, a cute and scary little girl who spoke like that. If it were someone else, he would have picked up the mace on the ground and started a duel with him about the dignity of the orcs. As for challenging Amy to a duel, it was better to let him hit himself with the mace first. Amy nodded. She seemed to be satisfied with Ha-Beng's answer. She climbed back to the high stool behind the counter and sat down, smiling sweetly at Meg. Meg couldn't help but smile. He touched Amy's head with a smile. The little girl was so cute when she tried to maintain order in the restaurant, and unexpectedly helped a lot. Then he went back to the kitchen to cook fried rice. Meg was busy for almost the whole afternoon while the customers were ordering one more serving. The customers who came in later smelled the aroma in the restaurant and looked at the customers who were eating the fried rice as if they were drunk. Although they felt that the price was a little expensive, a few of them still sat down and ordered one more serving. After tasting it, they couldn't help but order another one. "Burp boss, you must be a genius to be able to make such delicious food." We'll come again tonight. Harbeng finally felt full after eating 5 servings of Yangju fried rice in a row. Meg put the freshly cooked fried rice on the customer's table and nodded with a smile. He enjoyed the feeling of conquering the customers with delicious food. 5 servings, 50, 60, 30. That's 30 gold coins in total, Amy said, stretching out her hands and looking at Harbeng. Little girl, we'll pay together, Harbeng said with a smile. So that's... Amy tilted her head and thought for a while. Just when Meg was about to remind her, her eyes lit up and she said, 60 gold coins. Okay, here are 6 dragon coins. Please take them. Harbeng took out 6 dragon coins from his pocket and put them in Amy's hands. He stood up and reached out his hand to Meg. Mr. Mac, right? My name is Harbeng, and this is my big brother, Haga. Sorry to offend you. You have a brother named Harbeng? Meg asked with a strange expression when he took back his hand and shook it lightly. Both Haga and Harbeng were confused. Chapter 37. When the last customer left, it was already 1:35. There were customers who wanted to order more, but Meg politely declined. Opening hours were over, so of course they should rest. Amy and he were still hungry. Father, we sold 24 plates of Yangju fried rice at noon, and got 10 dragon coins and 44 gold coins. That's great. So much money. Amy clapped her little hands happily when she saw Mag, who had just closed the door, come back, her eyes sparkling. 24 plates. Mag was a little surprised when he heard that. Although he had been making fried rice non-stop since the opening of the restaurant at noon, he was still a little surprised that 24 servings were sold. Of course, what made him even happier was that the lack of customers in the restaurant had finally broken. The customers he served at noon would probably come again in the evening, and if they would spread the news of the delicious food like they did in Morbai, there might be even more customers in the evening. Meg calculated in his mind. In less than 10 days, he would be able to collect 3,000 gold coins to complete the mission, and he wouldn't have to worry about being disabled by the system again. He couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Looking at Amy, who was happily counting the gold coins, he said with a smile, Amy did a great job today. I'm going to make rainbow fried rice for you. You should be hungry. Yes, yes. My stomach is flat from hunger. Amy pursed her lips, touched her stomach, and nodded pitifully. Just a moment. Meg patted Amy's head, feeling sorry for her. He quickly walked to the kitchen, and soon came out with a plate of fragrant Yangju fried rice. Amy ran to wash her hands, dried them, and sat on the chair. She scooped up a big spoonful of fried rice, looked up at Meg, and said, Father has been busy. You must be hungrier than me, so I want you to eat first. Okay. Mag looked at Amy's serious little face and felt warm in his heart. He bent over and ate that mouthful of fried rice with a smile. He nodded and said, That's delicious, Amy. I'll make another one. Okay. Amy nodded obediently. She picked up the spoon to feed herself and ate happily. After lunch, Meg carefully cleaned the restaurant. He wiped every table with dry and wet towels to make sure there were no oil stains. Then he coaxed Amy, who was squatting behind the counter and talking to Big Egg, to take a nap, and he also took a nap. Mag and Amy had dinner in advance before opening the restaurant. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to eat until after 9 p.m., which would be too late. Morbai, who was next to the restaurant, was the first to line. Haga and Harbeng were almost there when the restaurant opened, and soon, Conti, who was riding a black donkey. Harbeng, who was at daggers drawn at noon, took the initiative to nod at Conti. He looked at Conti and pondered for a while. Then he lowered his voice and said, I think you might be able to slay a dragon. I heard that Meg Alex, the most powerful human knight, disdained to duel with others except on the battlefield. Are you paying tribute to him? Yes, he is my idol and my goal. One day, I will become a dragon slayer like him. Conti nodded with a smile, his eyes filled with fanaticism. Young man, I've heard this from at least 50 young knights who came to buy swords in the shop. If you really want to slay a dragon and not be eaten by one, you'd better practice your swordsmanship and get a decent mount. Meg Alex didn't ride a black donkey to slay a dragon, Morby said with a smile. Blackie has been with me for many years. He's an old friend. Conti shook his head with a smile. I'm going to Twin Towers Town in a month. I heard that the evil red dragon that attacked Twin Towers Town many times is active again. I want to go and try my luck. Meg was making fried rice in the kitchen, listening to the people outside talking about his legend. He felt that although he was no longer in the world of martial arts, his legend was still being told. Strictly speaking, that was his predecessor, but because their souls and memories had been merged in some aspects, it was not wrong to say that those experiences were his. His mount was indeed not a black donkey, but a griffin, the only purple-striped griffin in the Roth Empire. As Meg expected, the restaurant was much livelier at night than at noon. The customers who had been there at noon brought new customers, and the passers-by were attracted by the restaurant's appearance. They couldn't help but order a helping of food when they saw others enjoying it. Boss, I want another helping. I'm sorry. Today's opening hours are over. Please come back tomorrow. Meg saw the last customer out with a smile. He closed the door and let out a long sigh of relief. The opening hours were a bit too long. Father, guess how many plates of rainbow fried rice we sold tonight? Amy asked Meg. 40. Meg guessed after thinking for a while. Amy shook her head. She grabbed a handful of dragon coins excitedly. No, it's 45 plates. We got 20 dragon coins and 70 gold coins in total. Then we sold 71 plates of Yangju fried rice today. That's very good. Meg also smiled happily. Today's turnover was 426 gold coins. After deducting the cost, they made at least 213 gold coins. Yes. Amy nodded. She looked at Meg doubtfully and expectantly and asked, But father, your rainbow fried rice is so delicious. Other dishes must be delicious too. Why only rainbow fried rice? Meg was stunned. Looking at Amy's expression, he quickly understood what she was thinking. She probably wanted to eat something other than Yangju fried rice. Speaking of which, although this Yangju fried rice was delicious, it was too monotonous for Meg to eat 3 meals a day. Amy probably had the same feeling. Maybe not in the next 2 days. Looking at Amy's expectant expression, Meg felt a little helpless. The new Rugiamo could only be unlocked after completing the task of buying ingredients for 3,000 gold coins. At the current speed, it would take at least 6 more days. Okay. Amy was a little disappointed. 2,500 gold coins. Where should I get them? Meg looked at Amy and thought to himself. This was a huge sum of 250,000 copper coins. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. By the way, system, can I do crowdfunding for the new Rugiamo? Host, please take the task seriously. Complete the task strictly according to the normal method and procedure, and steadily move toward the goal of becoming the god of cookery. The system's serious voice sounded. Read the task for me again, Meg said calmly. Task, host needs to buy ingredients for 3,000 gold coins in 10 days. Completion of the task will unlock the new recipe, Largi Rugiamo. Failure of the task will reduce your physical strength by 0.5. Chapter 38. After a long silence, the system seemed a little annoyed. Host, please act normally. This will cause serious problems for the system. In any case, I will launch a new product tomorrow that costs 3,000 gold coins, and then use cash to buy ingredients that cost 3,000 gold coins. Mag paused for a moment before calmly emphasizing, 3,000 gold coins in cash. Approved, the system replied immediately. Meg smiled. This system really has no integrity. He touched Amy's head with a smile. Okay, I'll make Largi Rugiamo for you in the morning the day after tomorrow, okay? Largi Rugiamo? Amy's eyes lit up. She looked at Meg and asked curiously, Father, what's that? It's a kind of pancake that's 100 times better than pancakes. Amy will know when she wakes up the day after tomorrow. Meg kept her guessing and didn't reveal too much. It must be very, very good. Amy thought about it carefully. It was 100 times better than pancakes, and she looked at Meg expectantly. Okay. Millimeter. Go wash up first, then change into your pajamas and lie on the bed. I'll come back to tell you a story after I've done the dishes and cleaned up the dining room, okay? Meg withdrew his hand. Okay. Amy nodded obediently. She got down from the high stool, squatted on the ground, and patted the big egg that was wrapped in the blanket. She said seriously, "Ugly duckling, you have to sleep well too. Then come out early and grow up quickly." Then she climbed up the stairs with some effort with her short legs. Meg smiled. Looking at the big egg on the ground, he felt sorry for the little thing that was named Ugly Duckling before it was even born. He washed the bowls and spoons in the dishwasher, cleaned the 16 tables, and mopped the floor. Looking at the clean and tidy dining room, Meg smiled. Although he was a little tired, it was very fulfilling. He didn't need to ask the staff for help for the time being. By the time Meg turned off the lights and went upstairs, Amy, who had changed into her teddy bear pajamas, was already sound asleep. Her beautiful eyelashes fluttered slightly, making her look like a little angel. Meg put her little hand under the quilt and tucked in the corner. It seemed that the little girl was very sleepy today. "System, I want to buy a set of pajamas. I want a big brown bear," Meg said in his mind. "This system, cash. The pajamas are already in the wardrobe. Host, please check." A line of small words floated past. She bought one and opened the wardrobe. Inside was a set of brown furry bear pajamas. The pattern on the front was a cute bear. Very good. Meg nodded with satisfaction and took his clothes to take a shower. If it was in his previous life, he would never wear pajamas like this. If anyone mentioned it to him, he would get angry. Right now, he was thinking, Amy will be very happy when she wakes up tomorrow morning, right? After taking a shower, he changed into his pajamas and went back to his room. Meg lay on the bed and thought about crowdfunding. This concept was definitely too advanced in this world. Moreover, the restaurant had only been open for 2 days. It would not be easy to raise such a large amount of money like 3,000 gold coins. After thinking for a while, Meg had a rough idea. The customers who had been eating in the restaurant for the past 2 days could be considered to be middle class. Their spending power was not bad, and he had also learned some information from their conversations. Morbai was one of the few dwarven craftsmen in the City of Chaos. They could sell a weapon made by them for 1,000 gold coins. And he ate 2 plates of Yeongju fried rice 3 times a day. Other than the delicious taste, he probably wanted to relieve muscle fatigue and become a long-term customer. Haga and Harbeng were the sons of the chief of the Orc tribe. They were in charge of purchasing for the tribe. Being able to buy weapons and equipment for the tribal warriors in Morbai reminded Meg of the police in Dubai who were equipped with supercars. As for Conti, he didn't reveal too much information about his identity. However, apart from the black donkey, the 1 or 2 accessories he casually revealed proved that he was the 2nd generation of a wealthy family. In any case, he was someone who didn't lack money. He also remembered the elf girl who had come yesterday. But she probably did not have much money on her, so she had not come in the past 2 days. So, he did not consider her. There were a few other customers who had come for dinner today. He was not familiar with them, so it would not be good to rashly recommend them. So, he decided to focus on them for now. After making up his mind, Meg glanced at Amy, who was still sleeping soundly. He reached out to turn off the light, and soon fell asleep as well. After a good night's sleep, Meg opened his eyes the next morning. A little person was already standing at the head of the bed, looking at him with surprise with her mouth slightly open. Our Amy woke up so early. Meg sat up with a smile and reached out to rub Amy's hair. Yes, yes. Father's clothes are the same as Meg's. It's a big bear. Amy's is a little bear, so it's a little bear and a bear father, right? Amy said happily as she pointed at the big bear in front of Meg. Yes. Does Meg like it? Meg nodded with a smile. Amy likes it a lot. It's so soft and warm. Amy threw herself into Meg's arms, rubbed her little face against his chest, and closed her eyes comfortably. Meg looked at Amy, who was lying in front of him like a kitten, and felt that his heart was about to melt. After playing with Amy for a while, he washed up and went downstairs. Other people's fathers will help them tie their hair. When are you going to help Amy tie her hair? After going downstairs, Amy got out of Meg's arms, touched a strand of her ahoj, and looked at Meg with a pout. I'll work hard. Meg scratched his head a little awkwardly. This was really a difficult problem for him. If today's crowdfunding was successful, he would definitely buy the hair tying experience bag from the system first. In the future, he would be able to tie whatever hairstyle Amy wanted. Good luck, father. Amy has faith in you. Amy clenched her little fist and encouraged him. Okay. Meg didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he nodded. After having breakfast with Amy, Meg took out a pen and paper and wrote 6 similar subscription slips, each costing 500 gold coins. After carefully checking that there were no problems, he looked at the time and saw that it was just about time for business, so he went to open the door. Mr. Mac, business was good yesterday. The first one to arrive was still Morbai. He sat down at his usual seat and said with a smile, same old, 2 plates of Yeongju fried rice. Mr. Mo, you've attracted a lot of customers. Please wait a moment. Meg nodded with a smile. As soon as Morbai sat down, Harbeng and Haga also arrived. The sound of iron hooves stomping on the ground came from outside the door. Mr. Mo, we're here again. 5 plates of Yeongju fried rice per person. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.